matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Matt Hancock fought a rearguard action to close schools during the pandemic, according to new leaked messages.
Hello there, good morning. It is 6 o'clock on Thursday, the 2nd of March, and breakfast on GB News with Isabel Webster and me, Aaron Armstrong.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, reportedly battled tooth and nail with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over closing schools during the pandemic. According to WhatsApps leaked to The Telegraph, Hancock described it as mad that Williamson was trying to keep classrooms open.
The remains of a baby have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The couple will remain in custody after police were granted a 36-hour extension to keep them detained.
Sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple were left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage, their base in the UK. The home on the grounds of Windsor Castle has reportedly been offered instead to Prince Andrew.
And Idris Elba's beloved detective John Luther is back. He is starring in a film for Netflix. Showbiz reporter Steph Tetchy was at the premiere and will bring us all of the gossip from the red carpet.
She gets all the VIP invites to Steph.
And the late night.
All about
Ahead of the early morning.
There you go, yeah.
Good luck.
We'd love to hear from you throughout the course of the morning. You know how to do it. GBNews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews. So our top story this morning, the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, reportedly fought a rearguard action to shut schools during the pandemic.
Yeah, according to WhatsApps leaked to The Telegraph, he said that then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson was mad to try to keep them open.
Well, after failing to persuade Boris Johnson to close schools, children returned to classrooms for just one day before the PM announced that schools would close and exams would be cancelled.
Schools then didn't reopen until March the 8th, and writing in The Telegraph today, Gavin Williamson reveals he considered resigning over the closures. Well, let's speak to Conservative councillor Holly Whitbread and bring her in. Very good morning to you. This is a drip effect of this story, The Telegraph. A little bit like MP's expenses a few years ago. Yeah. Each day we seem to get a little bit more. What's your reaction to this morning's revelations?
Well, in terms of the leak, I think a lot of it is taken out of context, and it's really important we do wait to the full COVID inquiry when it does come. And what I tend to think, and we've got to remember that people's lives are at the centre of this investigation, and it's obviously a very sensitive topic because so many people died during the pandemic, is that what we forget about the pandemic is it was such an unprecedented time of panic, and whilst I'm sure there were conversations on the peripheries with ministers, there was a lot going on in government as well.
Yes, but Holly, I mean, the revelations yesterday, which were very much around care homes, were the early stages of the outbreak and the pandemic. But this is about January 2021, where we'd already seen closures in the schools the year before. It was a hotly debated topic in society. We were already beginning to see the effects on children of that. And it certainly seems as though there was a disconnect at the very heart of government on this. Who comes out smelling of roses from this? Anybody?
I don't think anyone does. And I think even at that time, we were still really balancing up the effects. Obviously, we had the second wave at Christmas and we had that kind of whole explosion of cases. So it was a very difficult balance. I mean, personally, I would have liked to see children stay in schools for as long as possible and potentially avoided this closure. So, you know, Gavin Williamson has had his splash on the front cover today and I can see his point of view, but it was a lot of difficult factors to balance.
I mean, Matt Hancock arguably comes out of this with some credit because there was a very good argument to say that keeping children in schools would have increased transmission, and it was clearly a very difficult and dangerous time for the NHS.
Yeah, and I think when we're looking at lockdowns now, and it's all very well to look at it in hindsight, but it is a really difficult balance between life going on as normal and making sure that children were in education, and now we're seeing some of the consequences of that, actually, the fact that kids lost months and months of education, and we're seeing people, young children, almost a year behind, if not more, in schools. So it was a very difficult balancing act, but I suppose you have very difficult competing priorities with the Health Secretary wanting to keep the country safe, but obviously the Education Secretary's job was keeping kids in schools.
Yeah, well, look, in hindsight, I think the consensus has certainly been that schools should have stayed open because to protect the NHS is one thing, but on the other hand, you have these children whose life chances have been affected, and you have children who were victim, unfortunately, to all sorts of things at home because of the pressure that parents were often under and no access to going out and playgrounds and all the rest of it. And the question, I suppose, always boils down to what the government, as they claimed, following the science, or was there politics involved in all of this? And we read one of the texts here, Gavin Williamson, the then Education Secretary, saying teachers just didn't want to teach. They effectively were being lazy. It was an excuse not to work.
Yeah, I think that was unfair. My brother was a teacher in the pandemic, and I know he would have much rather been in school teaching kids because it's the best way that you can teach. So, but I think it's always going to be a difficult balance between the politics and the science. Obviously, science during the pandemic was always a kind of lead-in factor. but you did also have to consider the other factors and the politics around it, which this decision shows they did.
You said at the beginning we ought to wait for the public inquiry, but is it possible to maintain that position now? Because so much information's coming out, we're getting it in real time, and I know it only tells part of the story or part of the truth, but the public inquiry could take years. So there is a good public interest in these details coming out now.
Well, I mean, I think there's questions about journalistic integrity in terms of the leaks. But, you know, I think the COVID inquiry will show the full picture. And I think that's only right, because you want to see the details, how decisions were made. You just don't want to see just what happened on the outskirts of it. So I think it's important you have the full picture.
Even if you do subscribe to that view, what about Labour's position that A, the inquiry should be given more teeth, and B, it should conclude by the end of the year, because simply people cannot wait, and because it's been undermined a little bit to the extent of these messages, it should be hurried up?
Well, I think the quicker the better. I do have a lot of sympathy with that argument, because,
though, is it?
well, we don't want to see it every single day on the front of the Daily Telegraph or just be talking about stories constantly. But obviously, we want the inquiry to be done properly, and it's important that that happens.
OK. Well, Holly Whitbread, really good to get your thoughts this morning. We'll see you again a little bit later in the programme. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, the body of a baby's been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon.
Yeah, the couple will now face further questions today after a magistrate granted police permission to hold them for another 36 hours. Our national reporter, Ellie Costello, joins us live from Brighton this morning. Good morning to you, Ellie. The worst news that anybody wanted to hear, that the remains of a baby have been found.
Yes, absolutely. Very sad news here this morning. And just below this police cordon here behind me, I can see 3 candles which have obviously been left overnight to have been lit by residents who are living close by. It's after the news that remains of an infant were found here close to the spot where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday night. Now, Detective Superintendent Lewis Basford of the Metropolitan Police, which is the force which has been leading this investigation, spoke to the press last night.
This is an outcome that myself and that many officers who have been part of this search had hoped would not happen. I recognise the impact this news will have on the many people who have been following the story closely, and can assure them that we will do everything we possibly can to establish what has happened.
Now, a post-mortem investigation will now take place to help officers try and establish what happened to that infant, and only a forensic examination is going to determine if that is the missing baby of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. Now, they are being held for an additional 36 hours in police custody. They are currently being held on gross negligence manslaughter. Now, teams have been combing through the area behind me overnight. They are looking for evidence of exactly what happened here, and crucially what happened to that infant. Now, this all started 7 weeks ago when it's believed that Constance Martin gave birth in the back of a car which was found burnt out on the M61 near Bolton. And since then, the couple have been seen on CCTV in Liverpool, in Essex and in London. Now, each time that they were captured on CCTV, they did appear to be making efforts to keep their faces covered. They didn't want to be seen, and officers were particularly concerned when the couple were seen buying camping gear in East London on the 7th of January. They were concerned that the couple were looking to live off-grid with this newborn baby, which hadn't received medical attention since it had been born on the 5th of January, and that triggered this national search which has been going on for the past 7 weeks. Now, the last confirmed sighting of the couple was on the 8th of January in New Haven on the south coast, and police believe that the baby was with them at the time and was still alive. Well, the couple were detained on Monday evening. It's after a member of the public recognised them from the media appeals, and they called the police, and officers were on the scene within minutes. And since Monday evening, there has been a painstakingly large search operation in place for this child. It's covered 90 square miles, and it's involved hundreds of police officers from Surrey Police, Sussex Police and the Metropolitan Police as well, which have used thermal cameras, sniffer dogs, helicopters, anything that is available to them. And much of this search has been taking place under the cover of darkness and in freezing temperatures as well. But very sad news that the remains of an infant have been found close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday night. And crucially, the police have asked the public and the media not to speculate as to what happened to this infant. There are 2 people in custody and officers are determined to get to the truth of this.
OK, Ellie Costello with that. Thank you very much indeed.
Sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple have been left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage, the cottage,
yes.
the 5-bedroom cottage.
Yes, the 5-bedroom cottage. Well, look, it's a story we first broke yesterday, but we now have this response from the couple's spokesperson. The home on the grounds of Windsor Castle's now reportedly been offered instead to Prince Andrew. Let's get the view on the person in the know. Kinsey Schofield, showbiz and royal reporter. Good morning to you, Kinsey. I'm just looking at Omid Scobie's tweet, who's their spokesperson, who has described this as a cruel move and that this was the only space that they felt safe in the UK.
You know, Isabel, he's not supposed to be their spokesperson. He's supposed to be an independent journalist for Yahoo, but he did write the biography Finding Freedom, and he conveniently gets all of these scoops. So he does seem like a spokesperson. Is this not the greatest episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians that you ever have seen? I feel like Kris Jenner has just bumped Rob from the guest house. This is very upsetting to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. We've spoken over the last few weeks about how Meghan has reportedly here in the States felt overwhelmed, felt excluded. We had no idea it was related to real estate. King Charles allegedly told them that he'd like them to start the process of moving out in January. Very suspicious that the story broke. I believe it's Tuesday evening here in the States, Wednesday morning for you. And Harry and Meghan drive nearly 2 hours to Los Angeles in the rain, which is like apocalyptic here, to have their photos taken at a big LA hotspot. You know, are they trying to divert attention from the headlines? It seems so. But this is a big story, not only here in the States, but for you too.
And we understand, Kinsey, that the decision was made very shortly after the publication of Harry's biography, Spare. So clearly it's not gone down well with the rest of the royal family. That's no surprise. What do you think it means for the coronation coming up in May? Do we know if Harry and Meghan have been invited yet?
We don't believe invitations have officially gone out yet, but sources do say that they have every intention of inviting the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Whether or not they'll go, you know, I think that that's really up in the air. I would have said a week ago that I thought Harry would definitely be there, but after this, I'm not so sure. I mean, the timing on this is all very strange, and I do wonder if this is a, you know, story leaked by the Sussexes to try to garner sympathy after several really hard weeks of criticism from, you know, between Spare and South Park. These guys have taken some severe hits lately, and it does make you wonder if this story, you know, was popped up out of nowhere so that people would feel sorry for them.
But, Kinsey, there will be people who do feel sorry for them, not least because they're being asked to vacate Frogmore Cottage, it's believed, to make way for Prince Andrew as he's leaving his 30-bed Grace and Favour mansion, the Royal Lodge. Now, of course, he's been in trouble in the headlines, in the courts over sexual allegations. He's always denied them. But, you know, those are serious allegations that he has had to fend off, and yet they're having to make way for him.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I am in a group text with a bunch of other royal commentators, and that was the tone this afternoon when we all started talking about this. This is really bad PR. If this is true, and the king is kicking out his youngest son, who, you know, clearly he's open about his mental health issues. He clearly has issues, to make way for his brother, who has been accused. He denies it, but has been accused of sexually assault with an underage girl. That is a horrible look, Isabel. That's not a good look for the king. So you're absolutely right. While this is intriguing and, you know, it's got people's tongues wagging, it's also not a great look for the palace.
OK, Kinsey Schofield with all the top lines. Thank you so much indeed.
And let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's stories. What's the time? 6:15. We should probably mention that as well. 6:15 this Thursday morning.
The final report from the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing will be published today. 22 people were killed in a suicide attack in 2017 at the end of an Ariana Grande concert. It's expected to say whether it could have been prevented by MI5 and counter-terrorism police.
Teachers in Wales and the south of England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay. It is the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands.
And to mark World Book Day, the Queen Consort has spoken about the importance of reading from an early age. In conversation with Children's Laureate Joseph Coelho, Camilla said reading helps children to understand different places, cultures and ways of life. See, World Book Day, yes, it's great to encourage people to read, but we're both parents. Fills most parents with a sense of dread, does it not?
Well, if you forget about it, it does. Then you've got to cook something up at the last minute.
This is because you have to...
It's yet another plan.
Outfit. Yes, so your children have to go dressed as their favourite character from a book. What are your kids going as?
Well, really, unoriginally, I've realised it's Harry Potter one.
Fantastic.
And one of the characters from Frozen.
We've got Dennis the Menace from Beano and Cinderella. But, of course, it's Strike Day where we are in London, so our kids aren't actually going to school today, so they've delayed World Book Day to tomorrow, and I presume that's the same for a lot of schools.
Which may give me one more day to come up with a better outfit than Frozen, because I don't even think that's a book.
It's not a book, but you can kind of make it a Hans Christian Andersen
That's one from
twist.
The cupboard.
Anyway, if you are a parent, a grandparent, a fan of World Book Day or not, we'd love to hear your stories and your comments on any of the stories that we're talking about this morning.
Yeah, coming up, new research says dodgy pavements could be costing the taxpayer up to £500 million a year. I bet you have some stories about those. Please get them into us here at GB News. I'll find out more on that.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to you. Very good morning as well. If you're just joining us here on GB News, it's coming up to 6:20 this morning. Still to come on today's programme.
Well, it's a packed programme. Idris Elba's detective John Luther is back in a big new screen adventure. And our showbiz reporter Stephanie Tetchy was at the big premiere last night, and she'll have all the red carpet gossip at 6:45.
And as teachers strike in Wales and the south of England today, we will speak to the Schools Minister and the Shadow Education Minister. That is coming up at 7:10.
And we would love to hear from you. You know what to do. Get in touch via email or Twitter. Hey, we're going to talk about something which I'm sure all of you can relate to. We are talking this morning about damaged pavements, be that manhole covers, bollards that are costing taxpayers up to £500,000 a year. But they're also causing accidents, according to new research.
That's right. The government-funded study looked at the cost to health services and local authorities paying out injury claims.
The charity Living Street says the findings highlight the need to prioritise repair of dangerous pavements. And today we are joined by their Policy and Research Manager, Dr Rachel Lee. Good morning to you, Dr Rachel. Look, we've all, haven't we, tripped over a tree root that's poking through a pavement or a manhole cover that's wonky. But these are serious things that don't seem to get addressed by local councils.
Well, they do, but they do so within constraints of their budgets and also their asset management plans. But I also need to unpack that number a little bit, because that's a maximum figure, and that's the cost of hospital care and social care. And the actual amount paid out on personal injury claims is a lot lower. It's in the region, well, we calculated in the region of £15 million for 2018, down to £7 million in 2020. So what you can see really is the comparison between how much gets paid out in personal injury claims, but actually the much potentially greater cost in terms of NHS and social care budgets, which are covered by local authorities. So it's almost like we're saving money on one side but end up paying much more elsewhere, and therefore we really need to think about how we spend money in the round to reprioritise something as simple as a pavement, which helps people to stay healthier and active as they get older.
But the data not comparable, I understand, across the country. So some regions suffer more falls than others. Can you tell us a bit more about how the numbers break down?
Actually, when we looked at the data, some areas did have more falls, but it wasn't linked to age. As in, areas with older populations didn't seem to have greater numbers of falls. But the problem is, as you get older, the injury you sustain when you fall is greater. And so the peak number of falls was between the age of 80 and 84. And the injuries you get as you get older are so much more serious. So hip fractures, for example, can be life-changing. And women were about 5 years ahead of the curve because of menopause and bone thinning. So we know that there are issues with the data that we need to think about in terms of how people are living and living independently, because of course there are more women as we get older living, and so more women falling and greater numbers of those sorts of injuries. So it was really interesting to look into the data, but it has implications that Living Streets would like the government to address in terms of how they prioritise government spending. So instead of building lots of new roads for billions of pounds, let's look after the infrastructure that we have.
I mean, I'm trying to think of the worst sort of pavement incident I've ever been party to. And I have a good friend. We were walking back. Our babies were very small and their child was in a buggy, not strapped in, so probably her fault, but she hit a bump and her 2-year-old went flying out of the buggy and chipped her teeth. And, of course, when they're milk teeth, there's nothing you can do. You have to wait till they fall out. So the next 3 years or so, her gorgeous little porcelain doll had these two front teeth which had been chopped in half, which was a real shame.
The ruined photographs.
Yes, well, no, but, I mean, it was such a shame.
Yeah, also, of course, dangerous.
Well, dangerous, and that was luck. I mean, it could have been a lot worse, and it could have been into a road, for example. So we do, as you say, we don't invest in our pavements in the same way we would repair a pothole, for example.
So, I mean, highways are managed through a highways asset management plan. So places that have the highest level of traffic and highest status. So, for example, Oxford Street, high status, Residential Street, low status. Those will get the most attention and the most inspections, for want of a better word, and highest priority for repair. But as soon as a fault is reported, if it's an urgent repair, it doesn't matter what status, they will go out and repair it. But the thing is, asset management plans are tailored to the budget that you have available. So it may be that if it's not such an urgent repair, it gets stuck on a long list, a backlog of work that needs doing. And that's where we have more of a problem, because there just isn't the budget available. And we're not trying to conjure money out of nowhere. I mean, at the end of the day, we know local authorities are cash-strapped, but if you can spend billions of pounds on new roads and not manage what you have, it just seems back to front, really.
What can people do? I mean, on a personal level, the pavements on my street are fairly broken up and battered looking, and of course there are quite a few trees on the street, and that does not help the pavements stay in a good condition for very long. But what can people do? Can they get in touch with their local councils? Because it does appear that this is just something that gets pushed to one side.
Yes, and let's make noise about it. I mean, the report that we've produced is downloadable on our website, and send it to your local council. To be honest with you, they're behind us on this. The Local Government Association Technical Advisors Group has been very supportive, and you can almost hear the sigh and the frustration from their corner. So definitely, let's just make some noise about it.
Yeah,
because it does affect people of all ages.
Absolutely. And I know our audience will be right on side with this as well. Dr. Rachel Lee, thank you very much indeed for explaining it all. And if at home you have had an accident or a trip, or you've got photographs of your broken up pavements, please send them in. We're going to name and shame.
Show us your pavements.
Show us your pavements.
Goodness gracious.
It's going to go viral. Keep them coming in. You know how to do it. The address on the bottom of the screen there.
Yeah, now, coming up, Matt Hancock's leaked messages during the pandemic are continuing to cause damage. We will discuss his clash over schools with Sir Gavin Williamson. Freddie and Claire Muldoon will be here to have their say with the papers next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back at 6:29. Bringing you up to date with today's front pages of the newspapers.
The Guardian says confidence in the COVID inquiry is hit after the leak of the Hancock messages.
The Times leads with the NHS's plan to help millions of people get themselves off antidepressants.
The Sun goes with Weir Orf as Harry and Meghan are evicted from Frogmore Cottage by King Charles.
And The Star asks, can we phone a friend, please? As Jeremy Clarkson admits his Who Wants to Be a Millionaire contract has not been removed.
Well, let's delve into some of those stories this morning. Our guests, the Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray.
Morning.
And the broadcaster, Claire Muldoon. Good morning to you as well. Well, welcome to you both. Freddie, no surprise, perhaps, what's on the front page of many of the papers, and I suspect it's going to carry on for several days. What do you make of this morning's updates, including this row between Matt Hancock and Sir Gavin Williamson?
Well, it's day two
of the lockdown files. I think we're going to have at least 2 weeks of Telegraph front pages, assuming no
2 weeks,
major global... I'd have thought so. That's a guess. I don't know that for a fact. But I think there's a lot more to come, obviously. There's a hell of a lot of texts to go through, and they've put enormous resources and an amazing team behind it.
Well,
and
I believe they thought at some point your boss might be leaving The Spectator because he was so heavily involved.
He was spending a lot of time at the Telegraph and being a little bit coy about what he was doing.
Well, now you know.
We had a hunch.
OK.
But anyway, also the story today is obviously this row between Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson, which Matt Hancock finally won, even though Gavin Williamson was very passionate about it. And the key part really is this opinion piece from Gavin Williamson, whose career, of course, has gone off the rails.
Well, both of their careers have gone.
It's two men fighting who probably have not long left in politics. Although Gavin Williamson, of course, is probably in the right here. It was a mistake, I think, to shut down schools. This was quite far into the pandemic. It's important to remember that. It was December. And Boris Johnson was listening to Gavin Williamson, and these texts are amazing. It's sort of, Matt Hancock texting other people who are on the call saying, oh, he's going mental again. And, and I mean, obviously, the desire to protect the NHS became this kind of mania that overrode everything else, every other concern. Yeah. But we all know the consequences. We all know about the damage to children that's happened as a result of the pandemic. We have 100,000 missing children now, children that are so reliably truant that they haven't come back.
Is there an argument, Claire, that this could be perceived as a bit of a witch hunt for the former health secretary? Because, you can clearly see from these messages that he wasn't deliberately trying to do anything in terms of harm for children. He was trying to protect the NHS. He was trying to, hate to use the phrase, put a protective arm around the NHS in this instance, and clearly working incredibly hard.
Well, the other thing we have to bear in mind is that none of the people that were in power have actually had to deal with anything like this before. So that was very much on the hoof all the time, and the decisions that were being made. But interestingly, in Williamson's op-ed there today, the front page of the Telegraph, he speaks of being the Minister for Education and how he had to maintain that and how he wanted to keep schools open. Why did he not say that at the time? There was no narrative from Williamson at the time to say, I'm in charge of education. It is my place to ensure that education and the rule, the way through for children to be educated remains open. He didn't say that at the time. There was nothing from him at all.
Well, he was also saying different things in public and in private about teachers, wasn't he? Privately, he was messaging saying that he thought that they just simply didn't want to go to work. Yeah. And then publicly, he was praising teachers for their incredible endeavours, which is not a good look.
He's quite famous for that. But also it reflects a sort of culture in Westminster of just glibly saying the complete opposite to what you think on almost anything. And actually, I mean, here he does say he did think about resigning. But he didn't resign. Yes. And I don't want to sound all, it's very easy for people who aren't in the position to say he should have resigned. But I think he probably should have resigned.
Yeah.
And I think, Rishi Sunak's done the same. He did a cover piece with us a while ago, a few months ago, saying, he'd always had doubts. He thought about resigning. And you think...
schools?
On lockdown, on the economic impacts of second lockdowns. And you think, given the stakes, given how important this is, given that this is public service... if you knew how bad it was, don't just say you knew it was bad now. You should have resigned at the time.
Yeah.
Clearly, the argument against these texts is that you're only getting one side of the story, Claire, and
are you though?
Well, you're getting it in real time with some responses. But I mean, these are WhatsApp messages, and then meetings take place, and we don't have the minutes of those meetings. And clearly, you would need both the minutes and some of the text to build up the full picture, and that presumably will come out in the inquiry, but the argument is that that'll take far too long.
Do you know what? It's going to polarise everything, Aaron. As everything in this country at the moment, everything is polarised. So you're going to get the camp that still want Boris back, that still want, it was unprecedented times. Their backs were up against the wall. What would they have done? And that is why there should have been a cross-party, cross-everything, a global response to this pandemic. And therefore, I don't think we would have to sit and actually listen to this absolute nonsense between WhatsApp messages for elected people in this country to actually have behaved the way that they have behaved. And there will always be a view. Was Hancock right or was Hancock wrong?
I think, Claire, you're absolutely right about the toxicity of instant messaging.
Yeah.
Most workplaces know about this. You know, you have sort of, gossiping to gossiping to each other in a meeting on text
Look
message.
at the police, for heaven's sake, with their group WhatsApp, mate. It's all
Exactly.
over. It's
and then you
pandemic.
take it to government, the most important thing in the country in many ways, and at a time of absolute crisis, and they're there sort of essentially gossiping, really.
You used the word glibly earlier, and that is such a good word for this, because it's so insidious in everything that they're doing at the moment, and it's so instant, and the messages do not read well.
OK, well, let's move on to something a little bit less polarising. Harry and Meghan, from Invictus to Evict Us.
Yes.
And this is on the front of the Sun. It wasn't original, I can't claim it.
Well, they're not polarising in a way, are they? Because, almost
Everyone
increasingly
hates
in America, everybody hates them. Prince Andrew is now going to get the Frogmore Cottage, which according to polls in America, Prince Andrew is more liked than Harry and Meghan.
Less leaks liked.
Well, to be honest, it's not a Section 30, it's not a Section 21 that everyone else in this country would get if they were served an eviction notice. I think Harry's dad, King Charles, is behaving like a king, not like a father. And the reports, if you look actually deeper into it, there are far more rooms and far more palaces now uninhabited. That I think the monarch is actually trying to streamline the monarchy. And, OK, this is maybe a knee-jerk reaction, because apparently the timing of it, the timeline would suggest it was after the publication of Spare, or as South Park call it, Wah. They're being told to move, but they don't really need a base here, do they? Because they're settled in America now.
Well, someone made the point they could just, do what ordinary people do and buy their own house.
Or imagine Airbnb. Imagine who you've got. Imagine the rating on Airbnb.
Or perhaps the royal family could offer them Nottingham Cottage, which they complained about so much in the Netflix documentary. Harry having to bang his head.
I suppose the argument is Andrew does need somewhere to live, and he doesn't need 31 rooms in Royal Lodge. He's moving to a house that's got Frog in the name, not Royal, so that's going to sting, isn't it?
That's a whole other problem for the royal family. Yeah.
Right, Freddie, let's go to the front of the Times. Political correctness. What's Suella Braverman been saying?
Yes, this is a story that's been bubbling on for a while. Prevent, the government counter-extremism programme. There was a review into it, which William Shawcross did, that found that it was spending a lot of time focusing on far-right extremism, which obviously is a problem, but in comparison to Islamist extremism, it's not that great a problem in Britain, certainly as far as the threat of terrorism is concerned. And Braverman is pointing out that political correctness blinded the government effectively to Islamist networks and the sophistication of Islamic terrorism globally. So, it's a welcome correction, I think. Hopefully Prevent will be put on... Counter-extremism in this country will be put on a more sensible footing from...
Shawcross is very critical of Prevent, even in the language that was used, because they differentiate somehow between right-wing extremism and Islamic extremism, which essentially is right-wing.
Yes, well, exactly. And this sort of almost obsessive focus with far-right groups. And you see it in other countries too, where, in America you see... masses of government effort, deep state stuff, intelligence networks and so on, trying to disrupt far-right groups. And again, there are far-right groups, and they're a worry. But if you compare it in Britain to the threat that Islamist terrorists pose to us on a daily basis, it's small fry.
And that's why free speech is so important, because I think if you try and police any form of activism or polarisation of opposites, I think it is, and try and drive it underground, it's much more difficult to actually deal with it, to know what you're dealing with and to view it. I would far rather it be out in the open and we can see what we're dealing with and let them dig their own graves.
Should we go to the front of the Star, Claire? Jeremy Clarkson, he's now on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah, well, this is in a lot of the papers, and he put out a tweet last night saying, I don't know what's happened, but I've not split up with Lisa. I'm not continuing with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He's had 10 runs of it. The season 10's already in the can. ITV are releasing it. Maybe his time was up anyway. And I don't think it's helpful to, pin this to his remarks, which, in my view, were awful. And I know it was a scene out of Game of Thrones. I've never watched an episode of Game of Thrones. I'm quite sure I'm not the only one. He shouldn't have written it. He apparently made an apology. But ITV must be in the category for the most woke channel at the moment. It's, they seem to be cancelling everything and anything that doesn't fit a box.
But we understand Amazon are reviewing their options as well, though, over his very popular farming documentary.
But apparently Caleb, that wonderful young farmer that he's got working with him on the farm, has said yes, Amazon have commissioned Series 3 of it. So, you know, who knows? He's got enough money. He doesn't need the time. He doesn't need the air. And I just wonder who's going to take over from his job.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't need it, but don't we need it? Don't we need a bit of Jeremy Clarkson? I mean, he's so good at what he does.
And I've not watched The Farm.
Well, I never
but
watched
everybody
Top
raves
Gear.
about it.
I never watched Top Gear, and then I watched Clarkson's Farm, and I suddenly understood the glory of Jeremy Clarkson because...
And the difficulty of farming.
Well, it's just he was so funny and so interesting, and the way he did it was just so unique, and I was like, now I get it.
Yeah. And I find it, the Star called him, the first word of the Star is creepy Jeremy Clarkson.
Yes.
He's not sort of Jimmy Savile, you know, it's kind of, he's written a silly paragraph that he's apologised for. I think he probably made a mistake in apologising for. And he's now being treated as this sort of national pariah, and he's not. You know, there's a lot of journalists are very upset about it. I don't think a lot of people in the country are very angry about Jeremy Clarkson.
And the nature and the tone of his articles tend to be funny, satirical, sarcastic.
So Rod Liddell's the same. You know, you're cut from the same cloth. These are, you know, similar men. They've got similar viewpoints. But, you know, we do need a bit of Jezza, I think, in our lives. But does he need this hassle? Does he need it? You know, does his family
The main
need
headline
it?
I'm happy about is he's still with Lisa, because she comes across as a total legend on Clarkson's Farm. PPE scandal, Freddie. This is on the front of the Mirror. I love it when there's a whole different collection of top stories, actually. It's a sign of a good bit of journalism going on. And this is Baroness Michelle Mone. What's she been up to now?
Well, she's emerging as one of the great crooks of the pandemic, allegedly. 65 million she received or her company received in PPE contracts and so on during the pandemic, and she's obviously a sort of internationally rich person. She claims that the £7 million villa that the Mirror's talking about is in her husband's name, but this connects to lockdown and the WhatsApp story, really.
The VIP lane that she used in the boards to get the contracts in the first place.
Well, exactly, and this sort of fire hose of cash that the government was just spraying out everywhere, and obviously a lot of opportunists took advantage of it and got very, very rich.
Some of whom with connections to the government and to cabinet ministers.
Some of them with connections to Matt Hancock, even.
That wasn't actually worth the money that they bought it for. It was completely, no one could use it. Completely substandard.
Well, this feeds into Labour's argument yesterday about the government waste, and it came up at PMQs as well. It's difficult for the government, this, isn't it? It is difficult.
I mean, Baroness Mone was a Cameron appointment. I think he was sort of excited that she was a sort of, you know, underwear model. She had sort of working class girl done good atmosphere about her, which Cameron, because he doesn't understand the working classes, thought was exciting. But she's, you know, she's still pretty attractive. So she, you know, it's good to splash on.
After all of that, she's still pretty attractive.
So that's why it's in.
That's why it's a good front page. Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to be. Well, I was going to be terribly catty and say, you know, with that amount of money in surgery, anybody could look good, but...
Yeah, I could look like Baroness Mone.
Exactly.
Sorry. Well, that's a completely different debate.
I might identify...
That's a different show.
A transgender stuff. We're talking, yeah.
Go north.
I wasn't going to go there.
With this. Claire, let's end on the Mail front page, shall we?
Yep. OK, so keep killer pilot behind bars. Carrie Johnson, the wife, obviously, of ex-PM Boris Johnson, has last night pleaded for a wife killer to be kept behind bars. Robert Brown killed his wife in front of their 2 children, apparently, and he's now up for parole. Why would he be up for parole, however, when it says he's shown absolutely no remorse? Now, when I initially read this story, I thought, why is Carrie Johnson actually involved in this?
Well, exactly, and many people won't know that she has personal history with John Worboys.
And I didn't know this. She was one of 14 victims of John Worboys, the taxi driver who drugged and then sexually assaulted young women in the back of his car. Carrie, there is no evidence to suggest, and Carrie herself has said this, she does not think that she was sexually assaulted. I have to make that clear. However, she met with the victims, Mrs Parks and Joanna's best friend, in Buckingham Palace, actually, at a do. And she was struck by their accord, struck by their story. that she is now saying that the only way that punishment can be treated in this country is for the crime to fit the punishment. And therefore no parole should be given to these men.
I don't see the link between the cases. I understand she gave evidence in the John Warboys case that led to his conviction, but what's that got to do with a man bludgeoning his wife to death with a claw hammer?
I totally agree. I think the question still stands, what's Carrie Simmons doing on the front page of the Mail? I mean, this is obviously an important issue, but you don't see Samantha Cameron, you never saw Samantha Cameron sort of still being on front pages of newspapers a while after. Something's going on here. Obviously, there is the Partygate inquiry coming up. We might hear a bit more about Carrie then. But there's a widespread sense that she was far too involved in policy while Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, that she got far too involved in these issues. Obviously, this is something she's passionate about, and it's a good cause. You know, it's something to be passionate about. Violence against women is a...
Carrie apparently drew parallels between her case and the case here, and she's urged Justice Secretary Dominic Raab to keep Brown in jail for the brutal killing of his estranged wife, Joanna Simpson.
The question is, has she moved the dial on this? Because Dominic Raab was quite clear at the weekend that A, this case isn't due to be reviewed till much later in the year.
Exactly.
B, he can't prejudice it in any way. It has to be decided independently by the parole board, although obviously he has supremacy over that. But I don't really understand if she's actually got any...
Well, I think there's a lot of manoeuvring going on around Raab. Obviously, you've got the bullying allegations coming up quite soon. Is this something to do with that? Is there some sort of animus between Carrie and Raab? It's hard to say. It's very odd that she's still involved. She's still got contacts in the media that will put her on the front page. And I don't really see why.
It is very interesting that the Johnsons, I mean, in one way or another, have remained on the front pages of one or other of the newspapers every day this week.
Yes.
And one of the days this week, the headline was that Boris Johnson hadn't said anything about the Windsor framework. And I just thought, how is this happening? I mean, the extraordinary level of interest in the Johnsons, I mean, it is noteworthy.
It is noteworthy. I mean, Boris Johnson is a very significant figure, and he makes the political weather in the way that Donald Trump did. I mean, I think he's less over in a way than Donald Trump is, perhaps, in the States. Although we'll see in the next year whether Donald Trump's over. But I think, no, I don't think he's over. I think he's going to be...
Politically, I mean, we could see him pop up at NATO or the UN or something, but after that, he's not going to contest or vote down the
Boris Johnson, I'm not sure the leaders of NATO would want to fraternise with him very often. He wasn't a popular person there.
I don't know. Such is his sort of affinity with Ukraine and the desire to... I think, I mean, the sort of level of grubbiness and money taking that he's done over the last few months suggests he's cashing out. But if the Tories get thrashed at the next election, which they probably will, does he eventually come back as the king over the water? I think it's quite possible. And then there'll be more front pages of Carrie Simmons.
Well, we'll have more front
Assuming
pages.
they stay together, that is. That's,
oh, gosh, come on, tell us more. Why would they
Goodness
not?
gracious, hold on.
Well, no, just with Boris's track record. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying, yeah.
Well, cynically suggesting perhaps there's an ulterior motive to this front page in the Daily Mail, Freddie, that she might be repositioning for a future career, or...
Oh, I think she's always been positioning for something, yeah, absolutely, no doubt about that. But more power to her elbow. There we go.
Yes,
I'll
there we
be
go.
benign.
Freddie, Gray, Clem will do more from both of them just after 7:30. But for now, we say goodbye and thank you very much.
Right, it is, 6:48, 12 minutes to 7. Good morning to you if you're just joining us. Let's bring you up to date with today's top stories.
The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was involved in a clash with the Education Secretary over keeping schools open during the COVID pandemic. The Telegraph says Hancock had a disagreement with Gavin Williamson, with Hancock mounting a rearguard action to close schools, despite Williamson fighting to keep them open.
Police searching for the missing baby of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon have found the remains of a baby in Woodland Close to where the couple were arrested. They've been in custody since Monday night, when they were found after 53 days evading police. Police say they had refused to divulge information on the location or the welfare of their child.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been asked to vacate their UK residence, according to the couple's spokesperson. It comes just weeks after the release of Harry's memoir, Spare. The spokesperson said a request was made for them to give up their residence at Frogmore Cottage in Windsor. Reports have claimed the move was sanctioned by the King.
Now, if you're a fan of the TV series Luther, you'll be delighted to hear the straight-talking detective, of course played by Idris Elba, has returned for a new film.
Luther, The Fallen Sun, is released on Netflix next Friday, with the movie building on the award-winning series.
Stephanie Tecci was at the big premiere in London last night and joins us now. Good morning to you. How was the premiere?
It was amazing. All the stars were out at the BFI IMAX in the South Bank in London. And it was quite, it's been long overdue. I think we've been in showbiz and in the film world, we've been talking about whether this film is going to live up to the TV series, because it's a big risk to go from TV straight to a movie, but it did live up to my expectation. I was gripped, I was hanging off the edge of my seat, and obviously Idris, there's been all talk about him, whether he was going to be Bond, but I think he's actually naturally Luther, and he's having his own Bond moment. We've got a trailer for viewers at home to watch, and it is incredible.
Detective Superintendent Schenk. We need to know where he is.
Look, I know he's in prison.
Except he's not in prison.
Of course he's not.
You promised me you could help. You know what they did to my son.
I need to stop this man. I'm still a copper.
Not anymore. And if you refuse to stand down, tactical unit will shoot you dead.
Something's coming.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow, it's all going on in there. So it's been 4 years since it's last been on our TV screens, and at the end of the last series, we saw that Luther had been arrested and he was in prison. So this film is very much about him trying to break out of prison.
I was going to ask, can you watch it in a kind of standalone way? As someone who's never actually watched the series before, can I then watch this without knowing the context in the background?
Yes, you can, actually, because I used to dip in between the series, and actually watching this alone, you can still see the the rawness of Luther as a character, but it brings a whole different new plot. We've got new characters such as Andy Serkis, which Idris talked to me about last night. And also, people have been talking about whether Idris is going to be Bond, and he said he doesn't want to be Bond, but he very much wants this to be our own franchise.
Yeah, he said he wants more of these, and clearly you can see the money that's been put into that by Netflix, because there's lots of those beautiful drone shots of London. London always plays a big character in this series. Part of the charm of the old series, though, was that it perhaps was a little bit lower budget, but he's suggesting there will be more of these to come.
Yeah, I think, watching it yesterday, actually, I think it's got that kind of Hollywoodness about it now, and, you kind of gripped. With Netflix, you kind of want to watch movie after movie, and I think that's why it now stands alone as a great franchise, which he spoke to me about last night.
It's the hope that this is a franchise, that we take it and duplicate more stories and take it slightly bigger, I think that's definitely been the ambition. It all depends on how people receive the first one.
Now, he's such a big star, and he really held the TV series together, because if we're honest, there were moments of that which were great, but also moments which were frankly awful.
Yeah, I know.
And low budget. But clearly the budget, not only Idris Elba, a huge talent now, but a great villain as well in Andy Serkis. He's got some great history.
Andy Serkis is such a lovely man in real life, but he always plays these villainous characters, but it's because he does such roles with much justice and so much conviction. So in the film, he plays a tech millionaire called David Roby, who actually is manipulating and killing people through technology. Idris also spoke about his character last night, and again, he does the role really well, Andy Serkis.
And there are a few other new faces and old faces.
Yes,
Bring us up to speed on, who we'll recognise and who we won't.
So, obviously, Andy Serkis, and then also we've got Cynthia Erivo. So she plays the new detective, Odette Rain. So she's like the female Luther in it, and it was quite interesting to see a female actually holding her own, and she looked amazing yesterday in a silver Louis Vuitton dress. We've also got a clip with her as well.
Nice to be the new kid in the house. This new house that's been here for a while, and I got to be a part of it, and it felt really great. They're the big shoes to fill, but I was very excited to do it. She was different, very different to anything I've played before, new, and her vibe is different from mine, so I really got a kick out of sort of playing this cool woman,
She says big shoes to fill, and of course the key female character from the TV series was Alice. Many fans of that will want to know what's become of Alice.
She's going to come back. She doesn't actually star in this movie, but I think the way it ended, I think definitely there's going to be room for her character.
She didn't die? I thought she died.
Well, it was a bit of a cliffhanger, and so I think there is room for her to come back. But there was other faces, such as DCU Martin Schenk, who came back. He's played by Dermot Crowley, and he was quite happy because there's so many scenes that have been filmed in Norway, so he was speaking about that.
But he was saying he prefers somewhere hotter, perhaps?
Yeah, he would. Maybe Barbados.
Have we got a clip of him?
Yeah, we've got a clip of it.
My favourite location was on a glacier in Iceland at 3 o'clock in the morning, -9 degrees. Thank you very much. When we were shooting the series, it was always shot in winter, and we've always been begging Neil to write us, you know, an episode in Barbados, and hopefully that might happen if there's another movie. We'll go somewhere warmer, but no, it was great this time. We were looked after extremely well and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, he had to add that line at the end, didn't he?
did.
But I completely...
Just hinting,
Of
we
course,
want to
it's
go
brilliant.
to Barbados next. But, guys, I do think there is a lot of leg and there's a lot of room for this to be a big blockbuster.
OK, good.
And it comes out on Netflix on March 11th.
Right, well, I know you're desperate for some sleep. You probably can't rest, and you've a full day ahead of you. But thank you for
Steph.
doing a late night and an early with us as well.
OK, do stay with us. We will have more on Matt Hancock's WhatsApp message leak, the latest from that as the COVID inquiry continues. First, let's get the weather with Alex Deakin.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. There'll be a few showers today, but most places won't see them. Staying dry and a brighter day across the south compared to yesterday. Still a bit of a chilly feel, certainly first thing this morning. High pressure is dominating our weather, and around that high, the winds are coming in from the North Sea, bringing that chilly feel, but also bringing in quite a lot of cloud. There are a few showers dotted across southern and central Scotland, fairly light, but nevertheless not feeling very pleasant if you get caught by one, and a few showers too across Northern Ireland. Not as much cloud across the south compared to yesterday, so a better chance of seeing longer spells of sunshine here. And just like yesterday, Western Scotland should also do OK for sunshine. Light winds here, so feeling quite pleasant, 10, 11 Celsius. We might get 10 or 11 across the southeast. Where it's cloudy, though, only 7 or 8 Celsius, so that'll still feel pretty chilly. During this evening, we're not going to see much change. Again, most places staying dry. I think the cloud will perhaps move back further west, so it may cloud over across parts of Wales and southwest England. Where skies do stay clear, again, we are likely to see a touch of frost. So quite a cold night in rural spots, down below freezing by a few degrees. Most towns and cities, they're probably just about staying above freezing. As for Friday's weather, well, we've still got high pressure dominating, so again, most places will be dry. Perhaps a few more breaks in the cloud for northern and eastern England. Perhaps not quite so sunny tomorrow across the south compared to today, but a decent looking day across Scotland. Yes, we'll start with a frost, but then lengthy spells of sunshine, just 1 or 2 showers over the Northern Isles. A coolish feel for the time of year, temperatures around and maybe a touch below average, but the sun does make such a difference. High pressure continues to control our weather through the weekend, but as it edges away, colder air is likely to push south through the course of the weekend, turning much chillier for next week.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Matt Hancock fought a so-called rearguard action to close schools during the pandemic, according to new leaked messages.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. It's Thursday, the 2nd of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster, and today, Aaron Armstrong.
Yes, good morning to you, and here is what is leading the news. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock reportedly battled tooth and nail with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over closing schools during the pandemic. According to WhatsApps leaked to The Telegraph, Hancock described it as mad that Williamson was trying to keep classrooms open.
The remains of a baby have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The couple will remain in custody after police were granted a 36-hour extension to keep them detained.
Sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple were left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage, their base in the UK. The home on the grounds of Windsor Castle has reportedly been offered to Prince Andrew instead.
And as the country's fertility regulator proposes plans to scrap the anonymity of sperm and egg donors, we'll be asking one dad who used a donor for his family how it could affect the children born from this method.
Get in touch the usual way, of course, on Twitter or email. You know the details there on your screen. You have been doing that already this morning on some of our subjects we've been covering so far. But pavements cracking, breaking, and manhole covers appear to be what's exercising you today.
Oh, Jay Castle says, I live in North Cambridgeshire. When I complained to my local council about paths that resemble the North Sea due to tree root damage, I was told they are usable.
Yes, Coventry, Carl from Coventry, sounds like we made that one up, but we haven't. I find that many drives do not have drop curbs installed, and therefore they don't have the tarmac laid to the drive, and are just constantly driving over paths and in turn disturbing the paths and cracking them. The council should charge them to put it right. So that suspect is one aimed at motorists as well.
Kevin says council should stop motorists from driving and parking on public pavements. Totally agree, it drives me crazy where I live. You can barely walk down the pavements. And Con says you have all these healthy young men and women in prison locked up. Get them out, repairing the footpaths. Not only will this help fix all these issues, but learn them a new trade. I have to say, I can't agree with that as well.
Well, yeah, if it fixed my pavements, I guess that would help. I'm not sure what the local residents would think about the people doing it.
Well, it depends on what their crimes are, I suppose. Keep your thoughts coming in. We love to hear from you. You can do that via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews.
To our top story, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock reportedly fought a rearguard action to shut schools during the pandemic.
According to WhatsApps leaked to The Telegraph, he said that then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson was mad to try and keep them open.
After failing to persuade Boris Johnson to close schools, children returned to classrooms for just a day before the Prime Minister announced they would close and exams would be cancelled.
So schools then did not reopen until March the 8th, 2021. Writing in The Telegraph today, Gavin Williamson reveals he considered resigning over the issue, but decided against it. Well, let's speak to Conservative councillor Holly Wetbread about all of this morning. Look, it's another day of leaks. We're told there's going to be 2 weeks of this drip effect. And look, it's not good reading.
No, and I think we need to be cautious that actually some of these leaks are out of context, and I would say that we need to wait to the full COVID inquiry to really understand it. But clearly, in hindsight, shutting schools probably was the wrong decision. But I think what we do see from these leaks, that no one has done this with any malice. Ultimately, Matt Hancock and the government of the time were trying to protect the NHS, protect lives, and it was a really difficult balancing act.
It's difficult to maintain that argument, though, that we have to wait for the public inquiry when we know how long the inquiry may well take. In fact, we've had a message this morning about that from one of our viewers who says, of course, the government would like to delay the inquiry because all inquiries in lists, Bloody Sunday, Grenfell, Iraq, simply to delay the inevitable outcome that proves how badly governed we are in the UK. And it's without doubt that the inquiry will take a lot longer than it ought to.
Well, it's got to take a long time because there's so much detail to come out.
3 years, though. 3 years since the beginning of COVID, and bereaved families want justice.
Quite rightly. I think what we need to remember is actually families and people are at the very heart of this. And I think it's unfair to really criticise the government too much because we did have one of the most successful and fastest vaccine rollouts. We saw the UK get back to normality quicker than any other nation. So we're not saying the response was perfect, but actually it was an unprecedented time. And it's right that we ask the questions, we have the debates, but we need all the evidence to do that.
Well, there'll also be, it's not just about bereaved families. There will also be raised eyebrows from hard-working teachers who will see that the then Education Secretary in private was describing them as lazy and that they wanted these schools closed because they didn't want to get back into the classroom. We have teachers out on strike today, and there's a real breakdown in the relationship at the moment between teachers and the government. This is on pay, but also on conditions. And this will feed into that feeling that the government, this Conservative government, really doesn't respect the role of teachers.
Well, I think comments from Gavin Williamson are unfair, if true. I mean, he did say that he's actually referring to the unions. But I know my brother was a teacher throughout the pandemic, and he wanted to be in classrooms because it's the best place for kids, and he wanted kids to be in school learning because we see now the consequences of months and a year or so out of school.
What all these messages do give us is an absolutely fascinating insight into some of the behind-the-scenes working of government.
Yeah.
It shows you just how much of it, especially during the pandemic, was made up on the hoof as they went along. So it gives us a fascinating insight. Historically as well, we're seeing it in real time as the messages get fed through the papers each morning. I mean, are you glad that these have come out?
Well, I think we remember off the hoof, but actually it was a really unprecedented, fast-moving situation. We've never seen anything quite like it. And actually one of the important things from the inquiry is that we will learn from the mistakes and hopefully use them if we ever have to face such a situation in the future. What I would say is I do think politicians need to be cautious when using WhatsApp.
I just want to ask you sort of a wider question about how damaging these so-called lockdown files, this 2 weeks of exclusives that the Telegraph are promising us, are for the government. I mean, here we are off the back of this historic deal, Rishi Sunak riding high at the beginning of the week. Will he shrug this off? Because essentially today we're talking about two disgraced former cabinet members, aren't they? Both of them have left government.
Well, I think Rishi quite rightly is saying we need to see the full inquiry and the full picture. So I imagine that's what Rishi will really focus on. And of course, it's not helpful to have these leaks. And I would really question the journalistic integrity of Isabel Oakeshott.
Really?
But what I would say is why was Matt Hancock so naive?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, she is a journalist, and ultimately the ambition of any journalist is in the public interest, is in unveiling the truth. And we certainly, as the public, know more today than we did yesterday about a very contentious period in the nation's history.
Yeah, but we don't know the full picture, and I think that's the challenge around it. And actually, Matt Hancock, why he passed on all these messages, there's a real question about his judgment there. But what I think is important is that we do see the full picture, and that's important for the country as well as those affected by the pandemic.
Yeah, but her point being that over time this will all get watered down and the inquiry eventually will take too long. And even though she's been given these messages in confidence and presumably been paid for them to write the book, she feels that it ought to be out there to speed things up, to hasten the debate. And I think there is an argument that this sort of brings the debate into focus.
Well, I think that, we've got the front pages are covered in it today, and it is important we have a debate and we look at it. But I do really think we need to see the full detail of this. Helen Whately gave a statement yesterday and and she was talking about the level of detail they went into. You know, not all the decisions were made via WhatsApp. That's very much on the periphery of the discussions that were had.
Do you think the government will struggle to maintain public confidence in the inquiry?
I think it's really important that the inquiry is allowed to kind of get on and really get into the detail of things, and it's not completely pushed by the press agenda.
Well, interestingly, Baroness Heather Hallett, who is leading that inquiry, has called on more whistleblowers to hand over WhatsApp evidence to the inquiry so that it can be reviewed in an official setting. But for now, we say thank you very much indeed to you, Holly Whitfred. Thank you.
The remains of a baby's body have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon.
Yeah, the couple will face further questions today after a magistrate granted police permission to hold them for another 36 hours.
Our national reporter Ellie Costello joins us from Brighton now. A very good morning to you, Ellie. The worst possible news, but perhaps news that won't raise too many eyebrows given some of the police statements in the lead up to this.
Well, good morning to you both, and clearly not the outcome that anybody wanted. And just below the police cordon here behind me, I can see several candles that have been left by residents overnight. That's after news that the remains of an infant have been found just up this hill behind me, actually, close to the area where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday evening. Now, you can see the police van just behind me here, and work is going to continue for quite some time. The police have extended their condolences to the wider family of this infant and to the general public as well, who they say have been very helpful with vital information in recent days. Now, Detective Superintendent Lewis Basford of the Metropolitan Police, who is leading this investigation, gave this statement to the press last night.
This is an outcome that myself and that many officers who have been part of this search had hoped would not happen. I recognise the impact this news will have on the many people who have been following the story closely, and can assure them that we will do everything we possibly can to establish what has happened.
Well, a post-mortem examination will now take place to help officers determine exactly what happened to that infant, but only forensic tests will actually help to confirm that this is the missing baby of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. They are currently being held for an additional 36 hours in police custody on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Now, teams have been coming here throughout the early hours of this morning. They are continuing to comb through evidence to establish exactly what happened here. And this all started 7 weeks ago when Constance Martin and her boyfriend Mark Gordon were found on CCTV, was seen on CCTV after their car was found burnt out on the M61 near Bolton. They were then captured on CCTV in Liverpool, in Essex and in London, and it appeared that the couple were going to efforts to conceal their faces. It did appear that they did not want to be seen, and there was concern when the couple was seen buying camping gear on the 7th of January in East London. Officers were concerned that the couple were looking to live off-grid. Now, Constance Martin is from an aristocratic family, and it is believed that she had access to large amounts of cash, which is one of the reasons why she was able to evade the authorities for so long. Now, the last official sighting of the couple was on the 8th of January in Newhaven on the south coast, and it's believed that their baby was with them at the time and was alive as well. Now, on Monday, the couple were arrested after a member of the public recognised them from media appeals and reported it to the police, and officers were there within minutes, and that sparked this painstaking search operation which took over a 90-mile radius to find this child. It involved hundreds of officers from Surrey Police, Sussex Police and the Metropolitan Police as well, who used anything that was available to them in order to find signs of life, including sniffer dogs, helicopters, drones and thermal cameras. All of those things were in use, and much of this search in the past few days has been under the cover of darkness and in freezing temperatures as well. But very sad news this morning that the remains of an infant have been found close to the spot where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday evening, and the police have asked the public and the media to be very careful not to speculate about what happened to this child. There are 2 people in custody right now, and officers say they are determined to get to the truth as to what happened here.
Indeed. Well, with the time at 7:14, let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories.
The final report from the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing will be published today. 22 people were killed in the suicide attack in 2017 at the end of an Ariana Grande concert. It's expected to say whether it could have been prevented by MI5 and counter-terrorism police.
Teachers in Wales and the south of England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay. It's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands.
To mark World Book Day, the Queen Consort has spoken about the importance of reading from an early age. In conversation with the Children's Laureate, Joseph Coelho, Camilla said reading helps children understand different places, cultures and a way of life.
OK, we're going to return to our top story. Another big day of WhatsApp revelations. It's easy for you to say. They've been linked to The Telegraph reportedly today, revealing that the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, fought a so-called rearguard action to shut schools during January 2021 of the pandemic.
Shadow Education Minister Stephen Morgan joins us now. Stephen, very good morning to you. First of all, your reaction to this morning's new revelations, the new WhatsApp revelations, and the story as a whole.
Gosh, I mean, people are just sick and tired of this government. I think what we're seeing is just all this infighting in the Conservative Party. People are tired of all this chaos from this government with everything going on. What a huge distraction. I really respect the work of teachers and school support staff across our country. They work tirelessly during the pandemic, and what we're seeing now is a teacher recruitment and retention crisis. The government are left failing on this, and I want to see action from the government.
Matt Hancock's move to close schools in January 2021. Can you hear me? I was just saying that you didn't oppose the move by the then Health Secretary to close schools in January 2021, so it's a bit rich being critical of it now, is it not?
Well, Labour was always clear that we should follow the science and use the best public health information available to us at the time. Now, if these WhatsApp messages are now telling us that ministers didn't follow advice, that's obviously a huge concern in light of the sacrifices the British public were making and the work of all those on the front line that were keeping us safe. But I mean, it's very clear to me that teachers and school support staff were doing their best in very difficult circumstances at a time that we saw ministers issuing last-minute guidance and not taking these issues seriously enough. And this is, I think, an example of all this Tory infighting that was the detriment to the British people.
Your leader, Sir Keir Starmer's called for the inquiry, the official inquiry, to be hastened and brought in by the end of the year. There also have been calls for a separate police inquiry. Would you support those calls?
Well, Keir's absolutely right to press the Prime Minister to make sure the inquiry continues. They took a year to develop terms of reference. They took so long to set this up, and we've not had formal hearings yet. So Keir's spot on that. If other countries can move forward with their COVID inquiries, so can the UK. We've got to learn the lessons of the past. It's very clear to me the government weren't prepared with the handling of this pandemic, and we've got to make sure it never happens again.
So if we have a Labour government next year, is that a commitment then that this would be wrapped up more speedily, perhaps almost instantly, under a new Labour administration?
Well, we've got to bring forward the recommendations as quickly as possible. I think we owe it to the British public to do that. Keir's right now calling for the Prime Minister to set out the timeline for this so we can learn the lessons of the past.
What it does give us is an insight into how much WhatsApp is used in the build-up to decision-making and policy-making, although we don't know the minutes of the official meetings that would have taken place in to go alongside the WhatsApp messages. Do you use WhatsApp with your parliamentary colleagues? And do you think there's a cautionary tale here?
Well, it's a key way to engage with people on key issues, but it's not the way, in my opinion, that you make decisions that affect the future of our country. So I think the government have got to really reflect on that, and lessons will be learned.
Yeah, it's interesting on a day where children are once again being locked out of classrooms today due to strike action, and given that we're all saying, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that children should be in schools, that Labour hasn't come out and condemned the strikes today.
Well, the responsibility for these strikes and the disruption that they will cause to children and parents rests firmly with this government. They've known for months that strike action was likely, but ministers have not brought the trade unions round the table to hear their views and concerns and negotiate a deal. And we know that teachers are burnt out, they're overworked, they are undervalued by this government, and that's why teachers are leaving in their droves.
Well, to be fair, last week, Gillian Keegan, if I may, just on that point... If I may just pick up on that point, last week...
For half an hour.
Well, no, Gillian Keegan extended the invitation to...
A half an hour meeting.
Because if she said if they held off their strikes today, like the RCN agreed to do, then they could have a proper grown-up conversation. But the unions simply were not prepared to do that.
Well, they were prepared to be in the room, but it was a half an hour conversation. Now, I think that's just tokenistic window dressing. That's not serious negotiation. Labour would have got the unions round the table early on and had a meaningful conversation to find a solution to avoid the disruption that will affect children and parents today.
OK, Stephen, we thank you very much indeed for your time. Shadow Education Minister Stephen Morgan there. Good morning to you. Thank you.
Well, look, stay with us. We'll be focusing on children some more after this. But in fact, we'll be talking about sperm donation and whether or not those who are born through this method should be able to find out who their biological parents are. More in just a moment.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Very good morning to you. It's 7:25. Still to come on the show this morning.
At 8:45, we will speak to The Fizz, a band formed of members of the Eurovision-winning group Bucks Fizz, and we'll ask them what they think of England's chances at this year's competition.
Then, just after 9 o'clock, we will go to Hornsey in East Yorkshire. Apparently, this is where you will get your hands on the country's best fish and chips. And keep your thoughts coming in. We've had loads of people telling us about their pavement problems near them, and all your views as well on everything from Luther to Matt Hancock. You can send in your thoughts on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet us at GB News.
All right, we're returning to the top story of the day, our big story, those WhatsApp leaked messages to The Telegraph. They reportedly revealed the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, fought a rearguard action in 2021 to shut schools.
Well, let's speak to the Schools Minister, Nick Gibbs, who joins us this morning. Look, we are talking about two people who are no longer in the Cabinet. That being said, this is not good reading for the government. And, of course, you were in government at the time of all of this. What's your take on the latest angles?
Well, those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And, of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions. Of course, we want to keep schools open for as long as possible, but we also had to deal with this very new crisis, this pandemic, this virus, against which humans had no immunity. So there were very difficult decisions taken on an hourly basis, on a daily basis, about how to handle this very serious pandemic affecting the world.
Mr. Gibb, which side of the argument were you on in this instance? Were you on Boris Johnson's side in this, or were you on the side of Matt Hancock?
Well, look, I was one of the more cautious ministers, but also, I wanted to keep schools open. Ultimately, we rely on the evidence from the Chief Medical Officer, but all this will be coming out in the COVID inquiry. They'll be poring over minutes of meetings, they'll be looking at the evidence supplied by the Chief Medical Officer, as well as discussions between ministers in meetings. So, we know from the Daily Telegraph that just these WhatsApp messages amount to 3 times the words in the King James Bible. So the COVID inquiry will be looking at all that evidence, all other messages between ministers, all the minutes of meetings and the advice given to ministers. It's important that the COVID inquiry looks at these issues so that we can learn the mistakes, we can learn what went right, so that we are better prepared for a future pandemic.
But is that argument, Nick, to wait for the public inquiry gone now, because the public confidence in the public inquiry may well have been shot, given the nature of some of the messages that have come out? Surely you're struggling as the government to maintain confidence in that?
No, it's an independent inquiry. We have absolute confidence in it. And the purpose of the inquiry is to learn those lessons so that we can make sure we are as prepared as we can be should something like this happen in the future. That's the main purpose of it, to learn those lessons. And the WhatsApp messages just give a very one-sided set of information about what happened during that very intense period of decision-making by ministers and by civil servants. It doesn't tell you the whole story, and that's what the COVID inquiry will be looking at. It's a serious inquiry, it's an independent inquiry, and it's terribly important for future governments to understand, how best to handle such a big international crisis.
Well, you may say it doesn't.
If you look at what happened over that, go on.
Carry on.
Now, if you look at what happened over the period of the pandemic, some decisions were taken that were mistaken, many decisions, most decisions in my view, were right. And if you look at the way that we managed to be one of the first countries to have a vaccine, the way that we handled all those very difficult decisions, I think actually we handled that crisis as well as we could have. But that's what the COVID inquiry will be looking into. It's a very difficult period for this country, for the world, and we just need to make sure we learn the lessons from that very intense period of decision making.
Yeah, and look, you said a moment ago that Gavin Williamson, you know him personally, and you believe he has respect for teachers. Many teachers this morning will simply not believe you, given the leaked messages that have been read now that show that he thought teachers were lazy, that they didn't want to get into the classroom, that the pandemic was an excuse for them.
That's not what he thinks. I know that isn't what he thinks.
Well, that's
People
what he
say
said.
all kinds of things in the heat of the moment. In the heat of the moment when he might have been angry for a split second. But actually, I know his wife is a primary school teacher, and I know that he has the highest regard for teachers, as I do as well, and particularly during the pandemic. People think that schools closed during the pandemic. They didn't, actually. They were open the whole time for vulnerable children and the children of critical workers. Teachers were also holding remote lessons for the children that were at home. And when the schools were open, they had to make sure that children were abiding by all the COVID security rules, hand hygiene, social distancing. So they were really going that extra mile during the COVID crisis to make sure that children were having the best education they could while being at home, and also providing a face-to-face education for vulnerable children and children of critical workers. So all of us in government, particularly in the Department for Education, have the highest regard for teachers, not just during the pandemic, but throughout, the day-to-day, even in normal times as well.
Well, you may say all these messages were sent in the heat of the moment, but what they really do is paint a picture that government comms on COVID and perhaps many other things weren't exactly, and certainly don't match what was going on behind the scenes. How would you respond to that?
No, the comms reflected what people were thinking in private. Those WhatsApp messages, as I said, heat of the moment, people were angry about a particular decision. Ministers discuss issues behind closed doors in meetings. There are disagreements about some very difficult decisions that had to be taken. But then ultimately, we rely on the evidence of the experts, the chief medical officer, decisions are taken, and then we all roll behind those decisions, and that's precisely what happens in government. And during the COVID crisis, of course, that's an even more intense period of decision making, and people get have very heated discussions behind closed doors. But then you reach a decision, and those decisions are implemented, and that's precisely what happens. And the public comms reflect those decisions, but they also reflect what people genuinely think about the teaching profession and what they genuinely think is the best way of handling this crisis.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've said repeatedly that it's important to learn the lessons of the pandemic. One of the big lessons that I think we can all agree on is that the right place for children to be is in schools. And yet here we are, day 3 of strikes across England. Here in London, both of our children at home due to strikes today. And yet we hear that you missed a vital meeting with unions off on holiday. Is the government taking this seriously?
Yes, look, the Secretary of State was there. I was away for a long-planned trip with my mother-in-law, my husband, and this is mischief-making because one of the joint General Secretaries of the NEU was away during half-term, and I say she's entitled to her holiday during half term, and I hope she had a refreshing holiday, and I hope she's now ready to start those negotiations. We wrote to the NEU last week, and the government also wrote to the Royal College of Nursing last week, offering very serious negotiations about pay, about workload, about all the issues that are important to nurses and are important to teachers. The Royal College of Nursing accepted those discussions. They agreed to postpone the strikes, which was a condition for starting those negotiations, and they're now in intense discussions. But the NEU decided not to accept those discussions, those conditions, to pause the strikes, and that's why we're going ahead. They're going ahead with a strike today, and I think it's unfortunate, particularly as children have had a disrupted education over the last 2 years during the pandemic. I think we should be around the table having those discussions about pay and all the issues that are important to teachers.
Unless the parties are on long-planned holidays.
Look, you know, I was in daily contact with the office during that period. This was a long-planned trip with my 93-year-old mother-in-law to the Far East. It was cleared with the Secretary of State. She was here. It didn't in any way affect the negotiations with the National Education Union. And this is just mischief-making because, as I said, one of the joint General Secretaries was on holiday during half-term, and I say that she's perfectly entitled to do that. People work hard and they need to have their breaks. But, you know, it didn't affect the negotiations. The Secretary of State was leading those negotiations while I was away, and I was in daily contact also, and also joining meetings during that period. But what we need to do now is for the National Education Union to pause these strikes, to get round the negotiating table, to talk about pay. That's what we want to talk about, both 2022 and 2023. Pay, and to talk about things like workload and recruitment and retention of teachers. That's what we should be doing right now. And you know, the NEU should not be going on strike, disrupting children's education and disrupting family life, working life, and childcare. All those issues that people should not be having to put up with that thing just because the NEU can't decide, because of their own internal politics, to postpone these strikes this week.
And Nick, speaking about disruption to students and indeed parents, special needs children to get further investment today. This is part of your improvement plan. We know that some parents have had to give up their jobs because of a lack of local support if they have children with special learning needs. And acceptance here, it seems that there are significant weaknesses in support for special educational needs.
Yeah, this is an important day. We're announcing the Special Educational Needs and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan to make sure that families don't have to go through very challenging times, making sure that their children have the right provision in school. So this improvement plan means that we'll have a set of standards that means that in mainstream schools, if a child has moderate special educational needs, they will get the right teaching for those children in those schools. We're training 5,000 early years special educational needs teachers. We're also opening 33 new special schools for those children with more severe special educational needs. We're spending £10 billion a year on special educational needs, and that's a 50% increase in funding for those children over the last 4 years. So this is a very important day about how do we make it easier for families with children that have special educational needs and disabilities to ensure they have the right provision in the right place and that it's properly funded. And that's what we're announcing today.
Nick, Education Minister, thank you very much for your time this morning. We appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Right, we're going to change tack and talk about something absolutely fascinating now. The Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority has proposed that children born via sperm or egg donation no longer need to wait until they're 18 to find out about their biological parents.
Yeah, at the moment, donor-conceived children can't find out about their biological parents until they're adults. So what are the ethical consequences? That's the question if it all changes?
Well, joining us to talk about it now is Nina Barnsley. She runs the Donor Conception Network, and Danny Ruddock, who used sperm donation to become a father. A very warm welcome to both of you. If I may start with you, Nina, just explain a little bit about what the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority is proposing and why.
Yes, so at the moment the law changed back in 2005 to mean that all donors, sperm donors and egg donors, need to be identifiable to children once those children turn 18. So that's the current state of play. But a lot of families are curious to make connections with the donor, to have more information about the donor before their child reaches 18. And also to have the potential for half-sibling contact. So a sperm donor may create children in many families. Those children will be half-siblings. And some parents and some children, when they get older and have a voice of their own, express an interest in finding out about those individuals. And so the current law doesn't allow that. So the HFEA is consulting on whether actually the law should be changed so that that could facilitate the earlier contact, potentially even from birth, so that donors and half-siblings can be put in contact with each other.
Do the parents of donor-conceived children have the ability to get in touch with the donor before their children are 18?
No. Well, do you mean under the current?
Exactly.
Yes, no. So at the moment, the rights are all with the donor-conceived person. So once that person reaches 18, so they're an adult, then they have the right to go and pursue the information if they wish to. They may not, they may. I mean, this does all rest on the assumption that these children know that they're donor-conceived. So we'll just put that out there because there may be parents who are unsure about whether they should be open with their children about the fact of having used donor conception. And of course, this also only applies to people who are conceived in the UK at a UK clinic.
OK. Thank you for explaining that. I just want to bring in Danny now in all of this, because, Danny, you have been through this whole process yourself. You and your partner wanted to become parents. There were problems, and you decided to go down the sperm donor route. Your children are now adults, but you very much took the view of telling your children as they were growing up about it, and it was sort of an open secret, as it were.
It was, actually. I told my oldest son when he was a week old.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, not because, obviously, he's the next Albert Einstein or anything like that.
You wanted to practice going through the repertoire?
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to practice it and get comfortable with actually saying the words. And if I'm being really honest, at the time, I didn't feel comfortable in doing it at all. And it's probably true to say I've gone on quite a journey over the years.
And how would you feel about these changes? Because would that have made you feel threatened a little bit as the non-biological father if your children, who you adore and love, are suddenly from a quite young age able to make contact with their biological father?
It's interesting terms, isn't it? Because I wouldn't say...
You're just father. Yes, absolutely.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a lot in language.
Yes, I'm sorry if that's...
No, it's OK. And people use real dad and things like that.
Oh.
And I would always call them the donor.
Right.
I don't know my own father. He left when I was about 3. And I have a natural curiosity as to what this man might look like, or, you know, and I'd love to meet him now. And if I have that desire, I think it's only understandable that my children would have that as well. They're 20 and 18 now, and they're both very different. My oldest one would really like to find out who his donor is. The youngest one's got absolutely no interest.
And they have the same donor. So presumably if one does, then they both do.
Well, that's true. And actually, we started doing some DNA testing recently. Both my oldest son and I found a first cousin. He has also found a second cousin, and he has been trying to make some inquiries. So he might find it out through DNA testing, you know. And I know all this change in legislation, but DNA testing is really helping to get the information out there.
And at what point did they want to know, or did you address the issue before they even asked the question?
Did they want to know?
Well, what age were they when they started asking those kind of questions? I mean, given that perhaps you should explain this, but you don't necessarily look like either of your sons.
I don't think I look anything like my sons at all, absolutely. Although I've had some people say, don't they look just like which I find extraordinary, I really do. I think it kind of happened. It was almost like the penny dropped as years went on. So someone said, surround them with the information and allow them to grow into it. And I think that's a wonderful analogy. You just keep telling them, and eventually they find out. I suppose as far as the donor is concerned, that's been happening over about the past 5 or 6 years, especially with my oldest son.
And I know you've said that you'd like to meet their donor just to shake his hand, to say thank you for the greatest gift I've ever had in the form of your son, which is such a lovely concept. Nina, a final thought from you. Do you think this could actually serve as a deterrent for sperm donors? Because presumably some gents just do this for a bit of extra cash and they don't necessarily want to have lots of children, which fundamentally they may find they've got, well, lots and lots of progeny.
Well, the situation is already like that because donors are already identifiable once a child reaches 18. So I think that any donors who would be put off by that prospect will already have sort of been screened out. And of course, at the moment, the law doesn't allow donors who are also curious. I mean, Danny was talking about the fact that he's curious and his children are curious, which I think is very understandable. But I think donors might also be very curious to find out what's happened to those children that they've helped create. So it could act as a deterrent, but I think it's also opening possibilities.
OK. Well, Nina, thank you very much indeed. Danny, interesting to hear your story. Fascinating story. Thank you both for coming on the programme.
And if you are just tuning in at home, you haven't missed the papers. We're running a tiny bit late because we've had two government ministers running a bit late for us this morning. But we are about to go through them and we'll be talking about Ron DeSantis. Could he become the next American president? Find out as we look through them today with Freddie Gray and Claire Muldoon.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. We are delving inside your morning newspapers today, joined by the Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray, and the broadcaster, Claire Muldoon. Let's start, shall we, Freddie, with The Times. They have a global exclusive with perhaps America's next president. The phrase that stood out for me was his pugilistic tendencies. Has he got a history of punching people?
He's quite fighty.
Is he?
He was also a lawyer at Guantanamo, and there's always this sort of the sort of various left-wing websites that try and suggest that he authorised the use of torture. But a lot of Republicans don't want that to come out because his popularity among right-wing Americans might soar if it emerges that he tortured terrorists. This is The Times. I'll hold it up. I think it's interesting that it's The Times because the Murdoch empire, Fox News, of course, in America, have very much ditched Trump. They've refused to have... There's a sort of silent ban on Donald Trump from appearing on the network, which he used to be on all the time. And so very much there's this big drive to get DeSantis going. DeSantis is obviously contemplating a run, considering... I'm not sure he's fully committed to it yet. I think he's leaving the option to back out on the table at any stage, because, of course, going up against Trump is a great task, because you have a huge movement of people who will always vote for Donald Trump, and that's going to be very difficult for him to overcome.
And you can imagine the dirt that will get raked up. It's already started by Donald Trump, and it should be said, Donald Trump's a man who helped to put Ron DeSantis where he is by backing him in 2018.
Yes, and when DeSantis was running for governor of California the first time, he did this ridiculous advert where he had himself reading The Art of the Deal to his... It was meant to be comic, and it was quite funny, but he was reading The Art of the Deal to his baby, and, you know, trying to just signal that he was a Trump person. And so he went from being this sort of acolyte, this fawning acolyte of Trump, to now this potential rival and challenger. But he's very, very careful in the way he talks about Trump. Because it's a very difficult act for him to...
Well, exactly. And Trump 2.0 is how he's referred to in the article.
Yes,
I mean,
or Trump with brains.
Trump with brains. I mean, is that it for Republicans? Is Ron DeSantis basically just a nicer form of Trump without some of the narcissistic baggage?
Well, yes. I mean, the niceness is an interesting point. I mean, Trump, for all his sort of public horribleness, is actually in private. People quite like him. People who've worked with him and not been thrown under the bus by him, which is actually quite a few. But they quite like him. I mean, I think he's amiable. I'm not sure DeSantis has that charisma. If you see him speak publicly, he's a bit awkward, he's a bit stiff.
Yeah, in the article they say he's surprisingly personable in a sort of one-on-one, but just dreadful on stage. It's a bit difficult for a world leader.
Well, but the person who is apparently the power behind the throne is Casey, his very glamorous wife.
Emmy Award-winning former TV anchor.
Yes, and look, she looks like Jackie Kennedy there.
She does, and that's deliberate, I'm sure.
Very, very deliberate. And she is apparently the sort of the brains behind the operation, and is also a sort of brilliant public performer. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this clash emerge if indeed he doesn't decide he can't possibly take on Trump and pulls out.
Yeah, OK, look, we're so short on time in this paper review. I'm really sorry. We'll try and make the next one longer. But Claire, let's squeeze in a story about childcare costs before we wrap up this hour. This is inside the Telegraph about parents paying to work.
And every parent that's out there at the moment with a young family will know that this really matters, and it's hammering purses and it's hammering the housekeeping budgets at the moment. Parents are paying to work in some cases as childcare costs rise. I mean, and they will continue to rise, unfortunately. I think something desperate has to happen here. I think the government have to help in any way, shape or form that they can, because clearly families are the fundamental building block of our societies. And without them, what's going to happen? If women are having babies as they are, you know, we need to make sure that women are catered, are helped as much as possible, but moreover, the children are helped as much as possible as well. Why don't we look to other countries? Vis-a-vis Hungary. Hungary, all nurseries, most of them are state-run. which helps, obviously, with the childcare cost because it's absorbed by the economy. Also, in Hungary, women who work do not pay income tax. Now, that could be a thing to help women stay at home so children aren't left to the devices of private healthcare providers. Ultimately, we're going to have to do something because things are at breaking point, and we have to help families continue on the trajectory of any form of normality, and we need to help and support them as much as we can.
Let's try and get one more in each. Freddie, I'll let you choose your next one, but I see kill all the cats in the mail, but feel free to choose which one you'd prefer to cover.
Well, it's either that or it's Andrew Bailey and interest rate. Should we do kill the cats? Well, just means we'll have to talk about Andrew Bailey next time, or maybe we'll just lose him entirely.
Let's clear up what kill all the cats is all about.
It was a story. It was actually reported before that there was this talk at the sort of height of the fear of the pandemic that we might have to kill not just some cats, all cats in Britain would have to be destroyed. Which is good news to a lot of cat haters.
Do you hate...
No, I'm
Freddie,
very clear under the bus.
speak very carefully.
I'm not saying
You're going to throw me under the bus?
I'm going to throw you under the bus. You're not...
I hate cats. They've got the devil in them. I really don't like them at all. I kill the cats.
Yeah, Claire was behind the kill the cats.
So were you, actually.
I have a cat that I would quite happily kill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my
Get Claire to do it.
Says every
cat
owner.
On
Says
balance,
every cat
there are no
owner.
cats here to defend themselves.
No,
I do love the felines.
I love the cat.
And a story that will very briefly make people happy. More red wine, good for the gut.
Yes, I'm happy about this one.
Have you not given it up for Lent?
No.
No.
Oh, well, Freddie and I kind of sort of have. Well, I have.
What do you mean you can't sort of give things up for Lent?
I know, but I can't watch rugby without having
proper Catholic.
I am, but I just can't. I need to rectify my intention. Anyway, this is a really good news story because we all have to try new grapes and we all have to try every grape because a couple of glasses a night, or they actually recommend it as an aperitif, as in the Mediterranean diet, actually helps your gut, helps you live longer. And I had 2 glasses last night and had a great sleep. Thank you very much.
And you've gained a few, half an hour of life? A bit more? An hour?
Well, I need to gain as much life as I possibly can,
Not this morning. You're in great form.
Well, there we go. So that's given me my Thursday night green light to go ahead with the bottle of red.
What, several different grapes?
Oh, sorry.
That's where the Lenten purge comes in. That's what we were talking about.
Oh, right, OK, not
it's
just a glass.
2. It's
and
tougher.
before you eat.
Have it whenever.
Or open several bottles and have a glass of each. That would be good for your gut and your mood.
But actually, it's interesting because red wine's been attributed to all sorts of things, heart health, but never gut before. This is a new one on me, so...
Saves you drinking the kombucha.
If the doctor says so, exactly. It beats kombucha any day. Look, we've got to leave it there. Freddie Gray, Claire Muldoon will have
thank you
more
very
and
much.
a longer paper review just after 8:30. But for now, we will see you in a moment. Here's
Back
the
shortly.
podcast.
Thank you.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Every time I
Matt Hancock fought a so-called rearguard action to close schools during the pandemic, according to new leaked messages.
Hello, good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock on Thursday, the 2nd of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and Aaron Armstrong.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, reportedly battled tooth and nail with the then Education Secretary, Sir Gavin Williamson, over closing schools during the pandemic. Minister Nick Gibb told us just a moment ago he'd been racing against time to make decisions to protect people.
Of course we want to keep schools open for as long as possible, but we also had to deal with this very new crisis, this pandemic, this virus, against which humans had no immunity. So there were very difficult decisions taken on an hourly basis, on a daily basis.
The remains of a baby have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The couple will remain in custody after police were granted a 36-hour extension to keep them detained.
Sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple were left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage. That's their base in the UK. The home on the grounds of Windsor Castle has reportedly been offered instead to Prince Andrew. And we have been talking about pavements, haven't we, this morning, about the state of disrepair that they've left in, and you have been emailing in your droves. What have they been saying, Aaron?
Let's see, Maureen. The local roads here in Kent, very poor state of disrepair. In my opinion, dangerous to elderly, vulnerable residents due to the many potholes and cracked surfaces. And Maureen's been in touch with Kent County Council, but they appear to have just say it's one small area that is deemed to be within remit for repair. I mean, essentially, this is the problem. People reporting their pavements cracked, broken, in really bad repair, but councils are squeezed for money and it comes last.
This was exactly Charlie's experience. He contacted Westminster Council to report bin lorries for cracking the flags, and they responded asking that he contacted the police to report a traffic violation. We've also had one from Steve in South Staffordshire saying parking on or partly on pavements is an offence. If the road is wide enough for vehicles to pass each other, it is rarely enforced by the police. And I have to say, it is a bugbear of mine when you can't get down the pavement because of the blooming cars parked on them.
And I'm just looking back at the notes that we're doing this story this morning, of course, because new research shows that people falling over and the damaged pavements and the state of them across the UK cost the taxpayer up to £500 million a year in payouts and repairs. And surface defects. Yeah, get in touch. Show us your pavements. I know that might not sound like the most interesting item, but it certainly got you talking this morning.
Yeah, it really has. So keep them coming in. So our top story this morning, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock back in the headlines today. He's allegedly fought a rearguard action to close schools during the pandemic.
According to WhatsApps leaked to The Telegraph, he said the then Education Secretary, Sir Gavin Williamson, was mad to try to keep them open.
So after failing to persuade Boris Johnson to close schools at the start of 2021, children returned to the classrooms, you might remember this, for just one day before the PM then announced that the schools would in fact close, and then, of course, exams had to be cancelled.
Yeah, it was another one of those U-turns that happened at the time as their policy changed fairly regularly. Schools then didn't reopen until March the 8th. And writing in The Telegraph today, it's an interesting piece, this. Gavin Williamson reveals he considered resigning over the closures.
Although he decided against it. The Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, was on the programme a short while ago. He told us difficult decisions had to be made during the course of the pandemic.
Well, those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And, of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions. We want to keep schools open for as long as possible, but we also had to deal with this very new crisis, this pandemic, this virus, against which humans had no immunity. So there were very difficult decisions taken on an hourly basis, on a daily basis, about how to handle this very serious pandemic affecting the world.
Nick Gibb there, the MP. Let's turn to Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, and bring him in. Tom, you'll have digested many of the latest revelations. No surprise that this is going to come out on a daily basis now in a drip effect. What's your assessment of today's stories?
Well, it's fascinating reading through these conversations because in many ways you can see different cabinet ministers fighting their own corner. Gavin Williamson, the then Education Secretary, really defending education and trying to make sure that that was the priority. Matt Hancock, arguably the Health Secretary, trying to pursue health and put that at the top of the priority. And then ultimately, with these different people fighting their corners and fighting their interests, decisions are made. Although it does seem, particularly with this conversation at the start of January 2021, that there was a great deal of rancour and indeed confusion. Of course, the whole country went into a lockdown. This was the culmination of the various tiered systems and sort of semi-lockdown status that we'd been in for some time, but also it was the start of the vaccination rollout, and we know that got going gangbusters after only a few months then, but clearly disagreements in terms of when that would have taken effect.
Pressure growing on the government to crack on with this inquiry now. Labour calling for it during PMQs to conclude by the end of the year to give it more teeth. That would certainly help with these revelations being in the public domain. Do you think there's any chance of that happening?
I don't think that we're going to see the government mandating this inquiry wraps up by the end of the first year. The problem, however, at the current point is that there is no definitive end time for this inquiry. I imagine we'll see calls for greater structure to it, although there are different stages of this inquiry that have so far been agreed. We will be seeing interim reports coming out on a fairly regular basis once this inquiry has properly got underway. But there is, of course, the argument that the final assessment of all of this does not have a date, does not have a structured timetable, and there's clearly going to be greater pressure to deliver that.
Well, and that's all part of Isabel Oakeshot's justification for publishing these WhatsApp messages. Her reason is that we can't wait any longer for official inquiry, and she points out several inquiries that have taken years and years, Bloody Sunday being a perfect example.
Absolutely. Some of these inquiries have taken over a decade in the past. And Isabel Oakeshott is saying that her public interest defence for breaching a non-disclosure agreement and the big step that she took to really breach the confidence of Matt Hancock as well is justifiable because of these public interest arguments that this inquiry will be too long and too late, and that these messages must be in the public domain now. What the government says, however, is that the messages themselves aren't the full picture. Leaked WhatsApp messages from what was going on at that time only captures, of course, what was being said on WhatsApp. The inquiry, of course, will have access to emails, minutes, meetings, and indeed oral statements as well from what was going on. And we saw just yesterday Helen Whately, the Care Minister, standing up in the Commons, responding to this urgent question by the Shadow Care Minister, Liz Kendall, producing actually an email that rather pushed back against some of the claims in the WhatsApp, sent from around the same time as the WhatsApps, but referring to greater context to these decisions, that there was a limited number of tests, for example, on this issue of testing care homes, and that these needed to be better targeted, and that not everyone could be tested just by a lack of resource. And so there is going to be more and more context, I think, probably dripping out from government around these messages, but clearly a fascinating insight into the inner workings of government.
What about the comments made by the then Education Secretary about teachers and how they just wanted an excuse not to be in the classroom, effectively calling them lazy? This is going to really help relations deteriorate further, is it not, between teachers and the government at a time when a lot of schools are closed today due to strike action?
Yeah, this will really not help those ongoing negotiations between the Department of Education and, of course, the education unions. Gavin Williamson has said today that he wasn't referring to all teachers, he was referring to some militant unions. But it is interesting. The language that was being used there by the people at the top of government really was not that dissimilar to the language that we would see in the comment pages of The Telegraph or The Spectator. Indeed, in some of these messages, you actually see the Prime Minister and other ministers sharing about some of these comment pieces and some of these articles saying, well, why can't we do this? And it is really interesting to see the back and forth, the language, and indeed some of these group chats where, whether it's Boris Johnson asking what the incidence fatality rate actually was and arguing why couldn't there be more of a voluntarist approach taken to some of these issues, and then the scientists coming back and explaining different elements. It's a fascinating
it's a bit of history, really, isn't it?
Of what's going on there.
Modern history.
I think many of us all had group chats like that during the pandemic, arguing different points of principle.
Don't involve us in this.
Very, very quickly, Tom, while we have you, Rishi Sunak ought to be basking in the success or relative success of his Brexit deal. That's been wiped off the front pages by this. I mean, will he be seething, or will he, do you think, happy that he can distance himself from most of this?
I think he'll be biting his nails, thinking, gosh, what messages did I send to Matt Hancock? And what might come out, perhaps even in the Sunday papers. But also, he'll be thinking about what's going on at lunchtime today, when we're expecting Boris Johnson to cast his verdict on the Brexit deal that's been agreed. So all eyes then as well.
Well, we're told they had a good discussion yesterday, and certainly
robust.
The mood music is that Boris Johnson isn't going to oppose it. But as you say, let's see Tom Harwood for now. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, the remains of a baby's body have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon.
The couple will face further questions today after a magistrate granted police permission to hold them for another 36 hours. Let's cross to our national reporter, Ellie Costello. She joins us from Brighton now. And, Ellie, it was the news we were all dreading.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning to you both. Clearly not the news that anybody wanted, but perhaps not that anyone is surprised by it either. Yesterday was the second full day of searching for life, and it did look as though yesterday that hope for life was dwindling fast. And last night we got that news that the remains of an infant had been found just up that hill behind me, close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday night. And the community here is really reeling from the shock of that news last night. We've just seen a lady get out of her car here with a jar of fresh flowers that she has just placed below the police cordon, and she was wiping away a tear as she did so. Clearly this is very upsetting news for a story that has captured the nation in recent weeks. And Detective Superintendent Lewis Bayford from the Metropolitan Police, which is the force which has been leading this investigation, he gave this statement to the press last night.
This is an outcome that myself and that many officers who have been part of this search had hoped would not happen. I recognise the impact this news will have on the many people who have been following the story closely. and can assure them that we will do everything we possibly can to establish what has happened.
Well, he also said that a post-mortem examination will now take place to help detectives establish exactly how this infant came to die. And there will also be a forensic test to establish whether this is Constance Martin and Mark Gordon's baby. Now, they are still being held in police custody. Police have an additional 36 hours in order to question them. They will be facing yet more questions today. They're being held on suspicion of gross negligence, manslaughter. And you can see behind me, it's still very busy here just north of Brighton, and there are teams combing through the evidence in what is now a crime scene, and we can expect that work to continue here for some time. Now, this all started 7 weeks ago when Constance Martin and Mark Gordon's car was found burnt out on the M61 near Bolton, and police believed that Constance Martin had given birth in the back of that car, or at least very close to the vehicle, in the days prior, and that triggered a national search. The couple and their newborn baby was seen on CCTV in Liverpool, in Essex and in London, and it appeared as though the couple were going to efforts to keep their faces concealed, and they kept their newborn baby within their coats. They did not want to be seen by the authorities. Now, we know that Constance Martin is from an aristocratic family. She had access to large amounts of cash, and that is just one of the reasons why she was able to evade the authorities for so long. But concern did start to grow when the couple was seen buying camping gear in East London on the 7th of January. Officers were concerned that the couple were looking to live off-grid with their newborn baby, who had not been seen by medical professionals since early January. They were then detained on Monday evening here in Brighton after a member of the public recognised them from media appeal and called the police, and the police were there in minutes. But the baby was not with Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, and that led to this painstaking search since Monday evening for this missing child. It covered 90 square miles and involved hundreds of officers from Surrey Police, Sussex Police and the Metropolitan Police, who used everything in their control to try and find signs of life, including drones, helicopters and thermal cameras. All of this, much of it done in freezing temperatures and in the cover of darkness as well. But very sad news that it has been confirmed that the remains of an infant have been found close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday evening. And crucially, the police have asked the public and the media to not speculate as to what happened to this baby. 2 people are under arrest and the investigation does continue.
OK, Ellie Costello with that. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, it is 8:15, just after 8:15. Actually, very good morning to you. Let's bring you up to date with some of the other stories making the headlines today.
A report from the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing will be published today. 22 people were killed in the suicide attack in 2017 at the end of the Ariana Grande concert. It's expected to say whether it could have been prevented by MI5 and counter-terrorism police.
Teachers in Wales and the south of England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay. It's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands.
More than 100 new electric buses will be rolled out in Yorkshire, Norfolk and Hampshire. It's part of a £25.3 million investment from the government.
Sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple have been left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage.
Yes, the home on the grounds of Windsor Castle has reportedly been offered instead to Prince Andrew. Well, let's speak to our royal reporter Cameron Walker about all of this, because, you know, we were talking about this yesterday. It was in the papers, but the spokesperson from the couple coming forward and talking of their shock. What's the thinking behind it, do you think, from Buckingham Palace, from the King?
Well, Buckingham Palace is not commenting at all on this, which is why I think it's perhaps quite surprising, or maybe not, that the Sussex team have decided to come out and confirm these stories at this particular time. Effectively, it means that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are no longer going to have a home in the United Kingdom. It was a gift from the Queen following their wedding in 2018. £2.4 million of our money, taxpayers' money, was spent renovating it. When they stepped back as working members of the royal family, Harry and Meghan did actually pay back that funds. But I think what's interesting here is the timing of when the King reportedly decided to ask Harry and Meghan to vacate the property. According to The Sun, it happens the day after Harry's memoir was released, when obviously there were many criticisms of members of the royal family. And I think it was perhaps the final nail in the coffin in terms of number of grenades that have been thrown against the royal family by Harry and Meghan. We've had Oprah, then we had the Netflix series and various interviews promoting this particular particular memoir. So clearly I think it shows the state of relations with the royal family.
And the fact that it's coming out now, even though presumably they've known about it for quite some time, there's a suggestion perhaps that they've had a couple of quiet weeks, their popularity's dipping, perhaps they're putting this back in the public domain to garner sympathy?
Well, perhaps it's interesting, isn't it? Because Harry and Meghan have constantly maintained they want privacy and they want to perhaps control the narrative of what's being said. But then they have put themselves back on the front pages this morning in the United Kingdom, again distracting from perhaps some would see as a worthy cause from a Queen Consort World Book Day, which perhaps we'll come on to later. But clearly, I think the other problem, I suppose, here is that the King has reportedly offered Frogmore Cottage to Prince Andrew in a cost-cutting measure because he lives in Royal Lodge, this massive mansion at the moment. The King's reportedly cutting his 250 grand annual allowance, which means he can no longer afford the upkeep of Royal Lodge. So, in the King's perspective...
To Royal Lodge, then? I thought perhaps the Prince and Princess of Wales might be eyeing it up because they reportedly think that where they're staying, what's the name of it?
Adelaide Cottage.
Adelaide Cottage is a bit pokey.
Yeah, well, perhaps. It is a very small cottage, very close to Frogmore, actually, funnily enough. But you're right. I think the Prince and Princess of Wales clearly are going to want a bigger property. But it's all within the guarded perimeter of the Windsor estate. So Harry, as we know, is currently in a legal battle with the Home Office over their decision not to allow him to pay for his own police protection when he's in the UK. He lost that security when he stepped back as a working member of the royal family. So from Harry and Meghan's perspective, Frogmore Cottage was the only place within the United Kingdom where they had guaranteed security, which clearly... it appears, is now going to be taken away.
And their unofficial spokesperson, Omid Scobie, tweeting that yesterday, saying that it was cruel and this was the only place that they felt safe in the UK. But just on the point of the timing and relating it to the release of the book Spare, during the widespread publicity that Prince Harry did, he talked about hoping for reconciliation. Essentially what he meant by that was he wanted an apology before he would come to the coronation. Does this tell us what the likelihood of an apology if the actual result instead is an eviction?
Well, perhaps. I have been told categorically that no invitations have gone out as of yet, but there are save the dates going to be happening, we think, next week. But you're right, I think Harry and Meghan have not decided whether or not they're going to attend the coronation as of yet. There are reports that Harry is demanding an apology from both King Charles and the Prince of Wales before he makes that decision. I think perhaps it's incredibly unlikely that William and Charles are going to give Harry that apology. In fact, from my understanding, they haven't even spoken for many months. I think it shows the state of relations are perhaps at an all-time low, and I think it's unlikely, perhaps, that we are going to see Harry and Meghan at the coronation following this news that they are having to give up Frogmore Cottage, as it were. But we'll have to wait for an official announcement on that.
OK. Cameron Walker, as always, thank you.
Now, coming up, less fluffy balls, please. I think that should be no balls, please, right? No balls, please. We will find out why tennis stars are complaining about the balls for an increase in injury, although other injuries are available.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
OK, some breaking news to welcome you back with this in relation to our top story. More revelations in the Telegraph alleging things said by Matt Hancock. Well, he has actually put out a statement in the last few moments. He says, I am hugely disappointed and sad at what he calls the massive betrayal and breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. He says there is absolutely no public interest in the case for this huge breach. He goes on to say Isabel repeatedly reiterated the importance of trust throughout and then broke that trust. Last night, I was accused of sending menacing messages to Isabel. I simply messaged to say it was a big mistake, nothing more. He says he will not be commenting further, but there you can see he is clearly upset and making a robust defence of his position in all of this. But that the breaking news, the latest, a statement from the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, calling it a massive betrayal and breach of trust by the journalist who handed this huge cache of WhatsApps to the Telegraph newspaper.
Yeah, and we'll have more on our top story as we go on throughout the morning. Plenty more on that. Keep your comments coming into us on that and anything else you've seen this morning. GB Views at GB News. Now let's turn to the sport. I should mention at 8:45.
Oh, yes, this is worth a squeeze in as well.
Bucks Fizz, the Fizz.
Yeah, well, they've renamed the Fizz now. They're going on a big tour. Of course, they're talking about the Eurovision that's being hosted in the UK later in the year. Really excited to get them on. We tried to get them on a little while ago, and they will be here with us this morning in around quarter of an hour. Talking about England's chances at this year's competition and how Sam Ryder has made Eurovision cool again.
Yeah, and at 9:15, this will be interesting too. She's the 5'2" self-described Essex girl who went on to become an undercover cop, and the star of the hit TV show Hunted. Danny Brooke joins us and will tell us all about her book, The Girl for the Job.
And keep those thoughts coming in. You know what to do.
But Paul Coyte is now here with us to discuss all of the, well, I say the biggest sports stories, the top sports stories.
To the 5'3" Essex boy now we're moving to.
Well,
sorry, 6'3".
As I understand it, Paul, we can sum up this morning's sport in fluffy balls and inflatable fish.
I think we probably can. We'll start with the FA Cup. There is inflatable fish involved in this, but Grimsby Town, the big shock, really. Well, I mean, we say the shock. Southampton haven't been very good, but Southampton, of course, in the Premier League, not doing terribly well, but 64 places behind them, Grimsby Town, and an amazing result. So they beat Southampton 2-1. First time they've made it to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup since 1939. So only Eamonn would probably remember them playing in that. But also, the other good thing is it was good to see the inflatable fish, Aaron. I don't know if you saw that, but Grimsby Town, there's one thing that they love to bring along. The fans love the inflatable fish. And the inflatable fish were banned from, when you said that they are, all I could see was me, the inflatable fish. So they were banned from taking them in. I don't know why. I don't know whether there's any danger in the fish, but the thing is, if they're contraband fish, I guess you take them in and then maybe blow them up or inflate them when you actually get inside.
Here's my suspicion.
Yes.
I think if you had an inflatable fish and you brought it in whole, perhaps you could use that to smuggle in some illicit substance like alcohol.
I think maybe, yes. What is your fish full of? I think so. So it's probably a good idea when people are bending the fish up like that. But anyway,
exactly.
Loads of fish, loads of fun. Grimsby came through, so a great result to them.
Upset there.
And they will go through now, and they're now into the next round.
As are...
Well, Sheffield United now, as a Spurs fan, a lot of Spurs fans, very upset, very disappointed. Sheffield United pushing for Premier League status. And then we've got Spurs, Champions League, had a great result, beat Chelsea at the weekend, and then changes were made. Spurs haven't won the FA Cup since 1991. So fans are desperate for silverware. 2008 was the Carabao, although it was Capital One Cup at the time, waiting a long time, and then changes were made, and it's like, you need to play the best team and go out and win the game.
Yeah. Fans want trophies, of course, realistic ones too.
Absolutely. So very disappointing. Manchester United beat West Ham. West Ham were one up. Now, there's an interesting theory here about Manchester United. Now, Manchester United are extremely lucky when it comes to the draw, because obviously you want a home draw. You want to be playing at home when the balls are drawn. And that's Manchester United 11 consecutive ties in domestic competitions, so Carabao Cup and also for the FA Cup as well. Every time they get drawn at home. That's 11 times on the trot. 15 out of 16 of the draws that they've been in, they've been drawn.
But that's also great for the away team, especially if the away team is a lower league team. They get a trip to Old Trafford.
See, you'll always look on the bright side. I just think in conspiracy theory here. There was always the talk, I remember...
Penalties.
Well, yes. There was always the talk when they used to make the FA Cup draw that one of the balls, especially if it got to the semi-final, one would be colder than the other one. So you know you want to go for. But anyway, I don't know whether they did that with Manchester United. But anyway, they're through. And also in the Premier League, Arsenal continue with their 5 points clear now, beating Everton 4-0, and Liverpool also making a run now for Champions League places.
So that's the football wrapped up. I think Arsenal actually should be mentioned. Everton beat them, didn't they, on their first game under Sean Dyche?
That's right.
So the new bounce is over.
Yeah, absolutely. There was no way it was going to happen at Arsenal. There was no way it was going to happen.
Speaking of bounce...
Yes.
New balls, please, but not the fluffy ones.
Well, yes. Tennis players are now pointing the finger for the reason that they pick up so many injuries when it comes to hard court tournaments. And it's basically their balls are too fluffy is the problem.
How does that work?
Well, there we are. Look, that's the one for the Australian Open. It doesn't look terribly fluffy there, does it, to be fair? But after about 5 to 10 minutes, what would happen is that they would fluff up a little bit, and then it would slow down the ball, which would then cause the tennis players to be trying to hit the ball much harder. It would be longer rallies, which mean the games would continue. So they're actually blaming the ball for these injuries. So there's quite a few that there is around. You know, there's Stefanos Tsitsipas with a shoulder injury, Sebastian Korda with his wrist as well. So this is in Dubai. Other ones in the Middle East and the Australian Open. So hard court. See, there we see how slow that ball is going there. It's ridiculous.
It's the nature of tournament tennis, especially Grand Slams played over 5 sets. That is just a very, very taxing sport on your body, especially when you play like Novak Djokovic.
Yeah. Of course.
You're right to left,
or especially when you're playing against Novak Djokovic.
Is there another sort of tennis ball available that's less fluffy?
There are different.
Oh, okay.
Well, there are different ones. You've got the pen ball, which is used in the States, which is apparently quicker.
The what ball?
The pen, because that's the make of them. The Slazenger.
It's Slazenger.
Slazenger is the ball that they use at Wimbledon. They've used for over 100 years. But that suits grass courts, but grass is much faster. But when you've got a hard court, which is a slower game, I'm actually doing the strokes, which is actually beginning to worry me.
That's a backhand slice.
It is. It's a lovely slice, isn't it? Unfortunately, it went straight into the net. But the ball, fluffy, slower, heavier, and it's been described, and some said that it's like hitting an apple. I've never seen a furry apple. But
this argument's been around before. It's just in the reverse. Back in the 90s, when Pete Sampras was winning every tournament because he had such a big, especially Wimbledon.
Huge serve, yeah.
Huge serve, and Goran Ivanisevic and Michael Stick. Yeah. They actually took some of the pressure, a tiny bit of pressure, out of the tennis balls to slow them down.
That's right.
Because they were too fast, and grass court tennis especially was becoming, boring.
That's it. If you had a big serve, you had a great chance of winning the game, and that was it. So slow it down. So if they ain't got you one way, they've got you another. You can't keep tennis players happy, can you, Aaron? You just can't do that.
I guess not. OK, well, there you go. Super fluffy tennis balls, blame for an increase in injury. We'll see if it makes any difference.
Well, I like to bring it.
If not, the tennis players are hard to please. We loved it. Thank you, Paul, very much indeed.
Thanks, Paul.
OK, stay with us. After this, we're going to please you even more. We've got Freddie Gray and Claire Muldoon going through the papers one last time this morning.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back, 8:38. Sorry, we're sniggering. We're just discussing World Book Day costumes for tomorrow. It always raises an eyebrow. But anyway, we're going to bring you up to date with today's front pages. Here's the Telegraph. Of course, it is the news making headlines this morning.
Yes, the Telegraph continuing their coverage of these leaked WhatsApp messages. Matt Hancock at the centre of them, of course. But today they're focusing on his rearguard action and a battle with Sir Gavin Williams about shutting down schools.
At the Times, leading with the NHS's plan to help millions of people get themselves off antidepressants.
The Sun goes, and I accept I don't have the right accent for this, we're orf, as Harry and Meghan are evicted from Frogmore Cottage by King Charles.
And the Star asks, can we phone a friend, please? As Jeremy Clarkson admits his Who Wants to Be a Millionaire contract has not been renewed.
But not orf, but rather in are our paper reviewers this morning. And delighted to say we have returning again the Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray, and Claire Muldoon, broadcaster. Very warm welcome. Welcome back to both of you. Who's going to kick us off then with these papers? Freddie, this is buried away on page 2 of the Mail. A very small piece, this, but perhaps significant. Keir Starmer aiming to hire Sue Gray.
Yes, it's a peculiar little story, this, because, Sue Gray was, of course, in charge of Partygate. She's known in the civil service as Deputy God. She's a sort of fixer who sort of comes in to do everything. And the story, if true, is that Keir Starmer is considering her as his chief of staff, which I think suggests a sort of, if true, suggests a closening of relations between the civil service and Labour, because, of course, Labour are expected to be the next government. You know, are they forming bonds with the civil service to facilitate a takeover? I suspect it's probably not going to happen, but the very fact it's being reported is quite interesting. And I think some conspiracy theorists will think this is to do with Sue Gray burying Boris with Partygate. She didn't really bury Boris with Partygate. She just sort of, handled the process. But she's very popular in the civil service. But I suppose the problem with stories like this is the civil service is not meant to be political.
Yes.
And we've seen a lot of the last few years, particularly with the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, of the civil service behaving in a very obviously political way and actually getting in the way of government. So that's the upshot of that. An interesting little story.
Yeah, I suppose we've also seen the kind of deterioration of relations between Whitehall and ministers, reports of bullying, breakdown of relations. I mean, they're going on strike, aren't they? And there was a survey out recently on the numbers of people who said that they'd been incredibly stressed and bullied in the workplace.
Well, and the civil service just hasn't cooperated on a lot of things. A lot of it to do with Brexit, a lot of resentment about Brexit. Levelling up, never really comfortable with the levelling up agenda, didn't quite know what to do. Relations between the civil service and the government have not been good, and I think it's something that the next government should really take on, because I don't think the Tories have proved themselves able to change things.
I think Starmer would play a blinder if he got Sue Gray on, to be honest with you, especially bringing her on board with her, impartiality that she's very well known for. So if he does, then it would be great for the civil service because, as you said, she's very well respected within the civil service. When you've got people like Jacob Rees-Mogg who were leaving notes on people's desks saying, sorry, I missed you. What were you doing? Working from home. So we've got this, as is in every industry across the country at the moment, this inability to get everyone back into the workplace to stop this working from home ideal that people have fallen into.
She ran a pub in Northern Ireland in the 1980s, Sue Gray.
Sue Gray, did she?
Yeah.
She did?
Yeah.
What was it
Maybe
called?
she can help. No idea. You got me there.
Interesting background, that.
Yeah.
OK, well, that would teach you to deal with sort of rowdy
during the
people
Troubles.
Knocking down your door and, you know, how to keep politicians in line.
Number
working
10's
a pub to start with.
A piece of cake.
Claire, this one sort of just seems absolutely obvious. AI chatbot, the program that's able to come up with new stories, it's able to, I don't know, write music, do anything you want.
It can do anything
and the most obvious thing it should be used for is to write essays for students at university.
40% of the Russell Group universities, and Russell Group obviously is the gold standard, apart from Oxbridge, of universities. Universities scramble to ban AI chatbot over plagiarism fears. I mean, we thought that would be an absolute given, wouldn't you? That universities wouldn't actually, one, allow it, and two, write it into their constitution in terms of their contract with the students. That if you do use this, you will be found out through turn it in or turn out whatever the key software is to, you know, detect plagiarism. But here it's only 40%. Interestingly, Glasgow University has said its staff were keen to explore, quote, how students can be advised to use large language models responsibly in their coursework. Is that because no one can understand Glaswegian? They're using it as a form of autocue? I don't know, or subtitles. It's ridiculous. But also, there's another report here saying that AI could soon replace human journalists. And when I was doing my master's, I've said this before, my thesis was on artificial intelligence and the rise of the robotic reporter. This is real. You know, everything's happened in history. We all know that. Everything is now, we've got horizon planning, everything is condensed, we've got all the buzzwords.
Well, it couldn't replace the journalists here this morning. I'd just like to be the first person to say that.
It could certainly replace me. I tried it.
Did you try it?
Last week. I said to ChatGPT, write an article in the style of Freddie Gray, and it wrote a very plonking, imitating my plonking style. It wrote a very plonking piece about cancel culture. And I thought, oh dear.
It's got me.
You've just cancelled yourself.
Yeah.
I do think
Irony of
most
ironies.
degrees these days aren't worth the paper they're written on. And, you know, actually, this would probably be quite obvious to spot. I am told, I haven't tried it myself, there's a lot of Americanisms, phrases and things that creep in. And, you know, any decent professor should be able to spot it a mile off.
Yes.
And also, it's impossible to ban things. The internet is
ubiquitous,
and
couldn't they use
back into the bottle.
Couldn't they use ChatGPT to weed out the people using it for plagiarism?
Do you know what I think we should be doing? I think we should go back to the way, well, I think we're all of an age when we first started out to do our primary degrees, that, you know, just use your hand.
Yes.
You can't plagiarise handwriting.
I've still got a lump on my middle finger from writing so hard at school.
And then we do always miss out the children who are, or the young adults who are studying all the stem cells. Oh, sorry, not stem cells, the stem cells. Stems. You know, the STEM subjects. You know, they can't use AI for that.
It's insufferably woke too. It refuses to answer any interesting questions if you ask.
What have you asked it?
Probably shouldn't say. No, I just... What did I ask it? I asked it a couple of things. And then it gives... No, I'm trying to remember. My problem is my memory's failing. I asked it a couple of things and it just sort of gave a pat. You know, I am a robot. I do not have opinions on subjects like this, and I think it's...
What was like an Alexa then?
Yeah.
Gosh. How boring.
If only ChatGPT could replace Andrew Bailey. I'm only joking. I don't mean it, but, you know, make him a bit more interesting. But, Freddie, what's the front of the FT saying?
I will make this very, very quick, because I know it is quite dull. There's been a bit of panic in the markets recently because inflation reports in Europe are coming out, inflation stubbornly not going down as much as hoped. So the expectation was that the Bank of England would push interest rates even higher in an attempt to curb inflation. Andrew Bailey has tried to reassure the markets that's not on the agenda at the moment. So 4%, he's saying he doesn't anticipate, from what he sees at the moment, he doesn't anticipate a need to go much higher than 4%. There we go. Was that quick enough?
That was very good.
Yeah.
No, I think we'll move on from that one very quickly. One more. Okay.
Right, well,
Claire, your turn.
Right, so let's go for this one.
Jet tipping. It's so hard to get it right, but apparently the Scots do it better than most.
And you know
really?
What? Yes.
Surprise,
and you know
surprise,
what
you've
else,
chosen this.
Isabel? The best of the Scots are the Glaswegians, thank you very much. We tip 55% in the top 10 tippers, followed by Edinburgh at 51. Way down at the bottom are those tight-fisted Welsh at 34% in Cardiff. So the Scots are the most generous tippers in Britain. Why is everyone surprised at that?
Well, isn't it just a...
stereotyping?
It is a stereotype. It's terrible. It's terrible. But
It's a tricky one, though, isn't it?
I think the stereotype is what makes you a generous tipper, because I spent quite a lot of time in America, and Brits have a reputation as being incredibly stingy with tips in America, so I would always overcompensate. And I spent a fortune trying to show how generous I was.
But it's just not in our culture, really, and I do not think that we should be made to tip. If you've got bad service, then don't tip. But as a mum who has children who have worked in the service industry, I would always want them to be tipped because I always want them to give good service.
I do believe it should be discretionary, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And it's so cheeky, I think, when it's just automatically added to a bill.
Oh,
I'm very happy to
that.
tip, but don't just assume I will.
But don't assume also that your server will actually get the tip.
No, that's
I think the important question at all times when you receive the bill is, I'm not halving it, you're paying. And also, who gets the tip?
Bring on robot waiters.
Oh, stop,
You have to tip
Freddie.
them.
Freddie, stop.
Well, some of them have more personality than some of the waiters I've been served by. So
I went to a dim sum place in London that's supposed to have robot waiters. What's it called? It's got a funny name. And they weren't working. They weren't working. No, it's called like D1 Tar or something.
Oh.
Yeah. But the robots weren't working.
Well, it's better
so
than Wonkies, where you get the food chucked at you.
I prefer to go to the cafe, but that's a whole nother story. We don't want to open that can of worms again. We have to leave it there. Freddie Gray, Claire Muldoon, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for reviewing our Thursday morning newspapers. Right, a treat for you now.
Yes, Eurovision.
Yes.
Eurovision Song Contest fans will definitely recognise our next guest. Most people will. The show's 1981 winners. The single, Making Your Mind Up, that reached the top of the UK singles charts.
So they are currently known as The Fizz, formerly known as Bucks Fizz, of course, and they are celebrating their 40th anniversary this year with a show at the O2's Indigo later this month.
And we are joined this morning by Cheryl Baker and Jay Aston, who are here to tell us more about the upcoming concert. Very warm welcome
Good morning.
to both of you. You both look great. Just tell us what we should look forward to then with this new show.
We're going to be performing, of course, all the hits. Obviously Making Your Mind Up and Land of Make Believe and My Camera Never Lies and all the others. But also, it's just going to be a joyous occasion because we're celebrating. So I think it's going to be full of nostalgia and it's going to be a party. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and you mentioned Making Your Mind Up, which is, of course, the song you're most familiar with for most people. I seem to remember it being a very dynamic, physical song. Are you still giving it 100%?
Still ripping off the skirts, yes. I think they put that in the contract these days. Yeah, it's going to be very glamorous. It's going to be all high tech. Very good show.
And are we going to see some skirt ripping? That was, your signature move.
Of course.
Good.
Of course.
Good. That's what people want. Listen, look, talk us through. I mean, Eurovision is where you came to the fore, and people will always celebrate Eurovision for you, I guess. One of the big gifts to us from Eurovision. Do you think we're still producing that kind of quality? Do you think Eurovision is still like an authentic way of creating music, or has it gone a bit into joke territory in recent years?
No, don't even say that. How could you? Eurovision is amazing. Eurovision has always been amazing. But because of Sam Ryder and the way he bigged it up last year, it's okay to like Eurovision again. It's cool. It's it's brought Eurovision back into the UK loving it again. So thank you so much, Sam Ryder. We met him a couple of nights ago, and I bowed to him. I said, "You're my new god." You've changed the UK's opinion of Eurovision.
And maybe not just the UK's opinion, because back when you were successful, 1981, perhaps it changed then in the years in between then and now, because it seemed to get overtly political when, I suppose, Great Britain couldn't buy a vote. And seems like with Sam's success last year, that's changed.
It's always just down to having a great song, a great performer, and it happening on the night. And Sam's just changed the whole vibe of it. We thank him so much. It's an enormous platform. We've had a career out of it. So it's definitely worth carrying on competing. Never give up for Eurovision, definitely.
Yeah.
And obviously this year will be a particularly poignant one. It was supposed to be held in Ukraine, being held in the UK, and you know our thoughts will be very much with all of those involved in the Ukrainian submission last year, but also you know trying to live through the ongoing situation there.
Yeah, we're all aware that it's the Ukraine's show. As Sam Ryder put it last year, it's their party, but they're having it in our house. But I think it's going to be a combination. You know, the BBC are going to do an amazing job on behalf of the UK and Ukraine. They're going to co-present it, which I think is great. You know, we're going to have Graham co-presenting. And we're hoping to be there. That's the plan. I've rented a house. I rented a house in Liverpool. As soon as I knew it was coming to Liverpool,
Really?
I got onto Airbnb and rented a property. So it's the whole week or 2 weeks before Liverpool is just going to be the place to be. It's going to be a huge party. There's going to be so much love, so much joy, so much colour and fabulous music, and we just can't wait.
Yeah, fantastic history of music in Liverpool as well, so really good choice for that. Listen, you're performing live still, and long may that continue, but I'm sure you've noticed with interest that ABBA don't even have to show up now to earn a buck. They can just do it, well, virtually. Is that something that you'd consider? Have you been approached? Do you even know how it would work?
No need. We're still in the flesh. We can still perform in the flesh. No need to be virtual.
And tell us, are you guys still all friends? I mean, we saw with ABBA, you know, the difficulties, I guess, of kind of being thrust into the spotlight and sustaining that kind of friendship and career over many decades. It's not easy to do. ABBA obviously have a museum. I've just come back from Stockholm, so I'm asking this. I went to the ABBA museum. But, you know, what's that like? How hard is that?
Well, we've had our ups and downs, obviously, because we lost our name but Fizz. We have to trade as the Fizz, which was really sad, and I didn't expect that to happen. I came back into the band after a 23-year holiday, and I guess it changed the dynamic, but we'd all been doing different things, and so Bobby, the other person who was in the band, he carried on trading, and his wife kept the name. So it's a long, silly story, and morally it's very uncomfortable, but we're still working regularly as the Fizz, and we get on like a house on fire.
Good.
So that's
Fantastic.
That really matters.
Well, we thank you very much indeed. Jay Aston, Cheryl Baker, we wish you all the best with the live events, and good luck for Eurovision. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Such a great idea, renting a house in Liverpool. Such a good tip. We'll be doing that. Listen, stay with us. We'll have more on the latest of Matt Hancock's response to those leaked WhatsApp messages. First, though, here's your forecast with Alex Deakin.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. There'll be a few showers today, but most places won't see them, staying dry, and a brighter day across the south compared to yesterday. Still a bit of a chilly feel, certainly first thing this morning. High pressure is dominating our weather, and around that high, the winds are coming in from the North Sea, bringing that chilly feel, but also bringing in quite a lot of cloud. There are a few showers dotted across southern and central Scotland, fairly light, but nevertheless not feeling very pleasant if you get caught by one, and a few showers too across Northern Ireland. Not as much cloud across the south compared to yesterday, so a better chance of seeing longer spells of sunshine here. And just like yesterday, Western Scotland should also do okay for sunshine. Light winds here, so feeling quite pleasant, 10, 11 Celsius. We might get 10 or 11 across the southeast. Where it's cloudy, though, only 7 or 8 Celsius, so that'll still feel pretty chilly. During this evening, we're not going to see much change. Again, most places staying dry. I think the cloud will perhaps move back further west, so it may cloud over across parts of Wales and southwest England. Where skies do stay clear, again, we are likely to see a touch of frost. So quite a cold night in rural spots, down below freezing by a few degrees. Most towns and cities, they're probably just about staying above freezing. As for Friday's weather, well, we've still got high pressure dominating, so again, most places will be dry. Perhaps a few more breaks in the cloud for northern and eastern England. Perhaps not quite so sunny tomorrow across the south compared to today, but a decent looking day across Scotland. Yes, we'll start with a frost, but then lengthy spells of sunshine, just 1 or 2 showers over the Northern Isles. A coolish feel for the time of year, temperatures around or maybe a touch below average, but the sun does make such a difference. High pressure continues to control our weather through the weekend, but as it edges away, Colder air is likely to push south through the course of the weekend, turning much chillier for next week.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
A massive betrayal and a breach of trust. Matt Hancock reacts to those leaked WhatsApp messages published in The Telegraph.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. It's Thursday, the 2nd of March. You're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and Aaron Armstrong.
Yeah, here's what's leading the news this morning. Matt Hancock has hit back at the journalist who leaked his WhatsApp messages, breaking his silence for the first time since the revelations. In a statement, he says he's hugely disappointed by what he has described as a massive betrayal and a breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott.
The remains of a baby have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The couple will remain in custody after police were granted a 36-hour extension to keep them detained.
Sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple were left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage They're based in the UK. The home on the grounds of Windsor Castle has reportedly been offered to Prince Andrew instead.
She's the former undercover cop and hunted host taking down the bad guys. Danny Brooke will be live in the studio as she releases a tell-all book detailing her time in the force.
And East Yorkshire is officially home to the country's best fish and chips. We will be live from Whiteheads in Hornsey as they celebrate winning this year's award.
That's a huge shout, but actually they didn't decide it. This was through an official channel, an official competition, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what makes the perfect fish and chips. Let us know your views on any of the topics of the day. You can do that via Twitter @GBNews or email gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Our top story, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock says he's hugely disappointed and feels betrayed after his WhatsApp messages were leaked to The Telegraph by journalist Isabel Oakeshott.
Well, in a statement released just within the last hour, Mr Hancock said there is no public interest case for what he calls a breach, and all the materials for his book have been made available to the ongoing COVID inquiry.
Comes to The Telegraph, alleges the former Health Secretary fought a rearguard action when it came to shutting schools in 2021.
Well, earlier, the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, told us difficult decisions had to be made during this time.
Well, those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And, of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions. Of course, we want to keep schools open for as long as possible, but we also had to deal with this very new crisis, this pandemic, this virus, against which humans had no immunity. So there were very difficult decisions taken on an hourly basis, on a daily basis, about how to handle this very serious pandemic affecting the world.
Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, for anyone who hasn't seen the story this morning, yesterday care homes, this morning it's all about schools.
It is indeed. This is a conversation between many different figures in government. And of course, you have different people representing different facets of government fighting their corner. Gavin Williamson trying to keep schools open. He was the Education Secretary at the time, of course, prioritising the education of children in the country. But also Matt Hancock prioritising perhaps the health of the country, you could say, saying that schools are a vector of transmission. And the argument was from Matt Hancock at that time that they would have to close at some point. It would be an embarrassing U-turn. They should get it closed straight away. And, well, it was, after all, an embarrassing U-turn. Schools opened for one day at the start of January in 2021 before being called to shut all over again.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Nick Gibb there was saying that very difficult decisions were taken in very difficult circumstances. But it's worth remembering the timing of this. This is January 2021, almost a year into the pandemic. There wasn't that same momentum. There'd been a huge public debate about the rights and wrongs of schools being opened. And I do think that has to be taken into account. There's also the whole debate about whether this is the right forum for that discussion to be had and whether or not this undermines the public inquiry. Certainly that's the view of Matt Hancock this morning.
Yes, and clearly in his statement today, he's very frustrated. And this isn't the first statement we've seen from Matt Hancock. He's been sort of responding in turn to each of these leaks as they come. And I would hasten to say this is not going to be the last leak we see. They were over 100,000 messages that were handed over to the Daily Telegraph, including 2.3 million words. I mean, there is an enormous amount of data, including some of the most senior people across political life in this country. I imagine we're going to get sort of one story a day for some time to come. But yes, Matt Hancock saying that actually we're getting a partial account here. WhatsApp messages tell one side of a story, but there are many other different forms of communication that the government used at the time, whether that was emails or whether it was meetings and their minutes, or indeed whether it's simply recollection. And of course, the COVID inquiry will be taking all of that into account. There'll be oral statements, there's data gathering. That work has already started. The criticism, however, from Isabel Oakeshott in The Telegraph is that there is no definitive end date for this inquiry. It does seem rather open-ended, and although there is some sort of timetable and there will be iterative mini-reports along the way, the message from Isabel Oakeshott and her public interest defence for breaching this non-disclosure agreement is that that's not good enough, that the inquiry won't get to the truth of it, and there could be another pandemic coming along any time, and we really do need these answers far sooner rather than later.
Don't say that. Tom Harwood with that. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, the remains of a baby's body have been found. It follows a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon.
The couple will face further questions today after a magistrate granted police permission to hold them for another 36 hours. Let's get an update from our national reporter, Ellie Costello. She joins us from Brighton this morning. And Ellie, this huge search yesterday, finding what everybody was really hoping not to find.
Yes, exactly. Clearly not the outcome that anyone was hoping for. Even yesterday there was some hope that life would be found, but we did get that news last night that the remains of an infant had been found close to the spot where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday night. And Detective Superintendent Lewis Bayford of Metropolitan Police, who are leading this investigation, gave this statement to the press last night.
This is an outcome that myself and that many officers who have been part of this search had hoped would not happen. I recognise the impact this news will have on the many people who have been following the story closely, and can assure them that we will do everything we possibly can to establish what has happened.
Well, a post-mortem examination will now take place to try and establish how this infant died, and there will also need to be a forensic test to make certain that this is Mark Gordon and Constance Martin's baby. They are currently being held for an additional 36 hours in police custody. They are being held on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter, and you can see behind me that there is a heavy police presence up on the hill just behind me where the infant's remains were found. There have been several tents erected up there, and there are several police vans at the top of that hill. So work is still very much underway, and Mark Gordon and Constance Martin are continuing to be questioned in custody. Now, this all started 7 weeks ago when the car that belonged to Mark Gordon and Constance Martin was found burnt out on the M61 near Bolton, and it's believed by police that Constance Martin had given birth in the back of that car, or at least very close to the vehicle, in the days prior, and that sparked a manhunt for the two of them and their newborn baby. They were seen on CCTV in Liverpool, in Essex and in London, and it did appear as though the couple were going to effort to make sure that their face could not be picked up on CCTV. They did keep their newborn baby wrapped up inside their coats, and they were seen buying camping gear on the 7th of January, which did concern officers because it appeared as though the couple were looking to live off-grid with their newborn baby, who had not been seen by medical professionals since it had been born in early January. It appeared as though the couple were getting taxis around the UK, and Constance Martin is from an aristocratic family. It's believed she had access to large amounts of cash, just one of the ways in which the couple were able to evade the authorities for as long as they did. But the last official sighting of the couple was on the 8th of January in Newhaven on the south coast. It's believed by police that they did have their baby with them at the time, and the baby was alive. Now, the couple were detained here in Brighton on Monday evening after a member of the public spotted them, recognised them from media appeals and reported it to the police, and the police were on the scene within minutes. But the baby was not with Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, and that led to this painstaking search, a 90 square mile radius for this baby. It involved hundreds of officers from Surrey Police, Sussex Police and the Metropolitan Police, who were desperately looking for signs of life and using things such as helicopters, drones, sniffer dogs and thermal cameras. Very sad news, though. It has been confirmed that the remains of an infant have been found very close to the spot where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. And the police have asked the public and the media not to speculate as to what happened to that baby, as this is a live investigation and 2 people are still in custody.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed. Ellie Costello there reporting for us on that appalling, sad story.
Harrowing, yes. 9:11 is the time. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories. And the final report from the public inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing will be published today. 22 people were killed in that suicide attack in 2017 at the end of an Ariana Grande concert. It's expected to say whether it could have been prevented by MI5 and counter-terrorism police.
Teachers in Wales and the south of England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay. It's the 3rd walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands.
To mark World Book Day, the Queen Consort has spoken about the importance of reading from an early age. In conversation with Children's Laureate Joseph Coelho, Camilla said reading helps children understand different places, cultures and ways of life.
Now, this is going to be a tough one for anyone like us who hasn't had breakfast yet, but perhaps it'll get you in the mood. It's all about fish and chips. Whitehead's Fish and Chips in Hornsey in East Yorkshire has bagged the prestigious title of UK Fish and Chip Shop of the Year.
Yes, the awards recognise the people who provide us with the best fish and chips across the country, both in terms of food and in terms of service. Well, our reporter Anna Riley joins us at the award-winning chippy now, and goodness me, what an accolade. It's tough competition out there.
Definitely, yes, this is the UK's #1 takeaway, as been given in those awards that were announced this week. And I'm joined by Jeff Whitehead, and he's just dished up some of his delicious award-winning fish and chips, and it's making me hungry too. Jeff, just tell us, how does it feel to have won this award?
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. It's what we strive for right from the very beginning, set standards, but oh, what a feeling. It's just fantastic, not only for us, but also for the town of Hornsey as well, and the community. So, yeah, it's fantastic.
And what was the criteria? What were they looking at? Because these awards have been going for 30 years now, haven't they?
It's quite vast. Ultimately, sustainability, your environment side of things. You've also got to put in, obviously, your food. That goes without saying. But there's like MSC, Marine Stewardship Council, they're all in there, and you pretty much need them all to get anywhere near. So it's quite rigorous.
And you've been in business coming up to 26 years now. Yeah. How have you seen things change? And with the cost of living, you know, you've really struggled, haven't you?
Yeah, COVID, if you put COVID into the equation as well, the coastal shops did reasonably well, obviously, because everybody ascended on the coast, but the inner city shops, they were struggling. And now, obviously, with gas and electric, there's going to be some very tough times coming. We're no exception. So we'll do the best we can. We'll change things. I've got solar panels already. I'm having some more fitted. So every little helps. Yeah, definitely. But then also you've got your refuse. We bail all our cardboard, send it off for recycling. We even send our oil away, which goes into biofuel. So every time you fill up, 5% of your diesel is biofuel from shops like myself.
So every little bit that you can do really to help the environment and cut on costs, because you've had to put up your fee by a couple of pounds, haven't you, just to keep going?
Well, before it all started, yes. I'll give you an example. We bought fish at £130 a box, and it shot up to £265 for a box of fish. Oil went from £700, because I buy it in bulk. It went from £730 for 1,000 litres all the way up to £1,850. Because this is classed as a cheap takeaway, which it no longer is, it's going to be a struggle. But we'll do the best we can, and we'll mosey on through as much as we can.
Definitely, and we'll just have another look at those. They certainly look delicious. Great to have this award, and Jeff will be going to Norway on a trip as part of the prize as well. Ooh. If you're in Hornsey, get to Whitehead's Fish and Chips.
Anna, thank you very much indeed.
Can you try one, Anna? You can't just look at it. It's the proof's in the pudding. Try one for us.
And credit to both of you for neither of you mentioning battering the opposition.
Oh, fabulous. There you go.
Chips for
Thumbs
breakfast.
up.
I'm hungry.
I'm starving.
I've got a banana in my bag.
Yeah.
When are the chippies open?
Not for a while.
Yeah.
Look, coming up, we'll be talking to the lady who chases down the bad guys, the hunted star Danny Brooke, about her time in the force.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, good morning, welcome back. It is 9:20. Very good morning to you if you're just joining us here on GB News.
Danny Brooke calls herself a self-confessed typical Essex girl who's now become the first female undercover cop to publish a book detailing her time in the job.
And Danny joins us now to tell us about going from, am I right to say, a girly girl to a criminal catcher? This sounds like something straight out of the book.
That's not far off. I'll take that. I've been called worse. So, yeah, I'll take that.
Well, I mean, it's an extraordinary story. Just, so wrap it up for us. How did you become an undercover cop? It must be one of the most taxing jobs you can do in the force.
I want to say it was a planned career, but it wasn't. I fell into it. And when you read the book, you'll see that actually happens quite a lot throughout my life. There wasn't much planning. It just kind of fell in my lap and then it happened. But my dad was a police officer, so that was kind of the most natural route for me, was to join the police. I didn't think I was going to. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Didn't quite work out. And after a very short time, before I knew it, I was being drafted up to New Scotland Yard, being quizzed by some big burly guys that were asking me to do a covert course, which I didn't know that existed. I thought it was like something from the TV. I thought wearing plain clothes to go out on patrol was undercover, but it's not.
And back then, how many women were involved in that team, and how many young women were involved? It can't have been too many.
There wasn't many. You probably know Nick from Hunted. She was my partner on the show. She was actually, me and her met doing our covert course. So there was me and her, but apart from us, there wasn't many. There were women, of course there were, but there wasn't many that didn't say no. We said yes to everything.
Look, what a fantastic career, and really laudable as well, because during that covert work you posed as a schoolgirl and you were able to catch a prolific paedophile, and a lot of people will celebrate you doing that. Fantastic job. But from that to, as a 5'2" female, tackling a 6'3" drug dealer, I mean, you've done it all. You've seen a lot.
Yeah, I have to say, though, it's one thing tackling drugs, and I mean, that's a thankless task, and that's just a revolving circle. We're not going to stop that with the work that I was doing. But the paedophile work, like you mentioned there, the schoolgirl, that was why I joined the police, ultimately, I think. You go home and you feel like you've done a good job. As an adult, I know that could happen to me, because that's why I'm deployed, so I can process it. But obviously a child, I'd rather it was me than a child. So that's probably actually one of my career highlights, that job.
And when you're undercover, of course, you have to separate your professional life and your home life, and the line must, at some point, become blurred between these things, because you have to live the character that you've made for yourself.
Yeah.
How difficult was that to do, and was it a case of having daily difficult decisions to make to try and protect yourself?
I'll be honest, and it's in the book, so I'm not saying anything that's a big revelation, but my home life wasn't the best at the time, so for me to go to work and be able to play multiple other people was great. I could escape and not have to really think about what was going on at home. So for me, it was probably a good thing. I had, an escape route. I was very lucky. But you are right, there's sometimes when you're at home watching your kids playing in the garden and you're on the phone to criminals arranging your next pickup or whatever it might be that I'm deployed on, that's not ideal.
What's it like being in Hunted? I know you're just back from Australia, filming it there. It's going global. What an incredible experience that must have been.
Yeah, so it was my partner, Ben. He was filming it. He's a deputy in the UK one. He was a deputy in the US one. And now he's just finished filming as deputy in the Australian one, which is great, because I get to go to all these really cool places and just cling on with him. But I think the next series of the Australian one is going to be the best yet. From what they were telling me and what I've seen, it looks pretty epic.
Yeah, and I mean, for fans of that show, is there something different in there for them, apart from it just being in a different place in Australia, in Melbourne?
Yeah, just the things that people do are different, and I've got to say, the Australian people are really friendly and nice, and they want to help the fugitives, whereas here, as hunters, we would always get them on our side. Actually, it turned around the other way for them in Australia, which was great.
Look, we talk a lot about the police here, just because they're in the headlines a lot. There's a bit of a breakdown in trust between the public and the police. Is the police force the same as when you signed up? And would you want your kids to go into it?
I think a lot's changed. I mean, it's a thankless task, isn't it? When I joined thinking I was going to serve for 30 years, I was going to do that. The money wasn't great, but the pension was incredible. That's gone. There's no pension anymore, so the incentive's not quite there anymore, and people just don't seem to have much respect for the police, which is really sad. I know more good cops than I do bad cops, and it's really sad. These people are going to work every day, putting the job before their own families and themselves, and at the end of it, getting all the abuse that they're getting. And to answer your question about would I want my children to do it, I think it's a great career, and I really hope that it turns itself around. I hope recruitment gets better, and that the job comes back up to the standard that it was. It was the best police force in the world. Would I want my daughter to do it? Maybe I would support it. I wouldn't want her to do it. I wouldn't actively push her to it, but if she said I want to do it, I would support it.
OK, so, well, you've seen it from the inside, and of course you know some of the pitfalls that are there, but you've come out the other side.
I've come out the other side.
And you've come out better and brighter as well.
Right, well, your book, The Girl for the Job, is out now, is it? Or
Today.
Yeah, it's out today. Danny Brooke, we wish you all success with that and upcoming episodes of Hunted. Thank you so much for coming in.
OK, well, that is it from us this morning. It's coming up to 9:30. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Stephen Ellie will be with you from 6 a.m. tomorrow.
And Tom Harwood will be with you now until 10 o'clock. Bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to.